YouTube. I don't know if we're on YouTube or not. We're on all the others. We should be on YouTube. And hopefully what happened last week, because we're still figuring out, we're a lot further ahead than we were before. But last week, when I scheduled the event, people who clicked the YouTube schedule event wound up sort of sitting around waiting while when we started the stream, some new YouTube window opened. I don't know yet if that has happened so far, but I'm already worried because I see no one commenting.
It looks like it's live on my YouTube.
Is it?
Because I
Okay.
connected my channel.
Okay.
So
Hopefully,
people on
okay.
Twitter,
Hopefully it's
YouTube,
the,
and Twitch should be seeing
okay.
this at least through my accounts.
Hopefully it's the scheduled event and not some other event. Otherwise, we're going to have another week of people sitting around YouTube wondering where the hell are Nick and Patrick. We're doing our best. It's, I'm assured that this is normal, that everyone who starts a live stream has to spend all this time trying to get the technology working the way you want it.
It looks like it's going.
Okay. Well,
on your channel.
Is it? Okay. All right. Hopefully it's the scheduled one. Anyway.
Oh, wait. No. It says no. It says this isn't live. Scheduled for now. It says it's waiting for you.
Oh, okay. See,
is it?
Okay. So,
is it because I added my channels? Is it like because of me?
No, I don't think it's that. I noticed you did that. No, it's this. So fed up with this. It doesn't need to be this complicated.
Because it's going on my channel. I wonder if it's because I added my channel.
I don't think it's that. Okay, let me just go to.
Okay, yeah, I just said on here it's not connected on YouTube.
Yeah, I know. It's just I see it says scheduled, but like, come on,
it's folks. Happening.
Yeah. Let me see what I can do now.
Okay, so it's gone on my Twitter now. Let's see if it's on your Twitter.
Yeah, no, it's only YouTube that I'm worried about. But like, why? Why can't it just work? Like, why do I have to do this?
Yeah. It looks like it's working on your Twitter account.
Yeah, no, it should work on the Twitter. It's just the YouTube. Like, YouTube's just saying, screw you, Nick.
Yeah, it's saying it's live on my channel.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna click go live on my YouTube. And let's see. Okay, go live. Now it should work. Okay. All right. Now it's going to work.
Is it going?
I'm live. Okay. I'm live on YouTube. Now I kind of know what to do. Oh, what a relief. Right. Hi, everyone. Okay. If you've ever wondered, gee, I wonder what Nick Dagan Best is like when he's throwing a tantrum. Well, now you have your answer. And we can move on. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Well, how you doing, Watson?
Good. I celebrated my 10th year anniversary with Beth,
Félicitations.
my wife, this week. So that was kind of interesting looking back. Although really, I know that these like decade anniversaries are really important, but honestly, I feel like for relationships especially, I feel like the really big anniversary is really the 8-year increments, right? I was much more worried about the 8-year anniversary than I was the 10-year anniversary, because the obviously the 8-year anniversary is when the Sun and Venus return to the same phase that they were at the time prior. So I've seen enough examples of 8-year-long relationships and 8-year-long marriages, and in fact, in the U.S. Census, the average length of a marriage is 8 years. Of course, there's nothing to astrology there, Nick.
My face registers no shock or surprise.
Yeah. No, there's nothing to astrology, Nick. It doesn't work. But
here it is. Bunch of claptrap. And, yeah. Well, I think the 10-year anniversary really sort of channels into the Jupiter Saturn thing. At that point, once you
Okay,
make it to
yeah,
10 years, you're in that Jupiter Saturn cycle of growth and retraction, and
right.
I mean the
That's
kind of
true.
the big deal ebb and flow. Like 10 years is 10 years. Like that's
Right. And that's because the Jupiter Saturn conjunction happens every 20 years. So you're kind of looking at that halfway point as a kind of
exactly
decade, decade-ish, decadic. I don't know what the
decadic.
right
Yeah.
word
Is that a word?
word would be.
Decadic.
I don't
Decadic
know.
should be a word if it isn't one.
Yeah, to refer
Yeah.
to something that's like 10 years long.
Yeah.
So something kind of decadic, I guess, about the Jupiter Saturn cycle. Maybe that sort of fits. But uh yeah, so it sort of prompted all of my memories about how we kind of got together and some of the astrology surrounding that, which was kind of interesting, and I shared that on Twitter. Some of my, in fact, I actually technically predicted that I would have an important relationship again in May of 2012, and that is exactly what happened. um and though I didn't have any reason to suspect that that would be the case. But anyway, so that's a little bit about my week. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, no, things are generally good. You and I are exploring AI, so I'm spending a lot of time learning how to do various things with it, all related to astrology in one fashion or another. But yeah, a lot of different stuff. So and sort of simultaneously, like trying to learn how to make videos with AI, learn how to use the ephemeris with AI, and other sort of research related projects. And so yeah, I mean, it's sort of we're very much in a cocoon phase, but it feels like every week that passes, I'm my great brain has grown just a little bit, and I've made it just a little bit further into this new world that we're entering.
Yeah, in fact, astrologer Renee Oshop, who on Twitter is at Ayur Astro, that's AYURASTRO. Um, she recently tweeted about how she was able to get an AI to learn like the text of Vedic Valens so that she could like ask Valens a question. And so she was able to help Nick and I out with getting us all sort of set up with kind of understanding this, how to use this program LangChain. Not to give away all of our AI secrets, but she did offer in public,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
to show people how to do this. So, um, it's quite interesting. So far, my experiences with asking AI Valens a question, or maybe VAILENS Valens, um, it's, I mean, it's not perfect yet. I mean, you like when you ask it a question, it will kind of summarize some of the um chart examples that it has within the text. So it gives you an answer that sounds very Valens like, but I'm not entirely sure how relevant each answer is to what I'm looking for. But there are different modalities you can use when you're searching a text, when you're querying a text with AI, where you can have it summarized for you, or if you take the temperature all the way down, it will only give you exact quotes from the text, which is still really useful. So this is as someone who knows nothing about Python or coding, beyond like
Sure.
simple HTML and Excel spreadsheets, this is a bit of a tall climb. But if us old farts can figure it out, we can sort of get it up and going. I think of how far really things must be going with the number of people out there who can, who know a bit more about how to use these things.
Yeah, I'm just finishing Andrew Hodges' biography of Alan Turing, which is called, the movie was made of his life called The Imitation Game. And now that we're fully in the sort of AI world, it's a perfect time for me to have read this book, because this is exactly like what you mentioned with AI. It's very much playing an imitation game. It's pretending to understand things that it doesn't really, which
Yeah, this is interesting. Someone here has said, Zeke says,
yeah, I see that.
AI researcher here. I honestly think the generative AI has been significantly overhyped. I think this is an interesting question. I think there's suddenly a degree to which we can see AI as a kind of paradigmatic shift, like a, you know, paradigm shift really for society. But I feel like there's another way in which AI is sort of registering in some ways on this kind of smaller scale of technological developments. I feel like there's this pendulum. I don't know what could be causing. It's probably some maybe there's some sort of astrological correlation to this, but there seems to be this pendulum in technology where we kind of go, well, first we have this sort of so right, for example, think of like timekeeping, right? We started off with, sundials, and eventually we were able to put this device on your wrist so you could look at a watch. I'm obviously overgeneralizing it. There's a lot of in between steps, but eventually we decided to put that watch, in your pocket. So you had to keep taking your watch out of your pocket if you wanted to look at the time. And now then we sort of graduated to phones. So, or rather, we put it on our wrist. So now you only have to check your wrist. But then we went to phones, which go back in the pocket. And so we're changing this, the
Well,
technology we use to do the same thing.
there are watches again now.
Yeah, now we have watches again.
I mean,
Um,
I get what the whole, I mean, in terms of it being overhyped, if all you're doing is reading about it, then yes, it certainly is, overhyped, because there's a lot of chatter about it now. Like you said, it's a paradigm shift, and we're suddenly in a world where everyone is talking about it, whereas, not long ago, barely anyone knew it was happening. It was just sort of aware in the
sure.
background that they were developing it, but it wasn't really, unless you were really involved, that's all it was. So that sort of the public face of it is getting a lot of hype, and that's bound to be sort of overhyped. But we're just sort of playing with it, and dealing with the reality of it. So it's not so much a matter, like, once you're actually working with the technology, um, you have a sense that, yeah, okay, of what the realities are, what the parameters are so far. But you certainly get a sense that the development is happening quickly.
Right.
And I mean, as of this past week, uh, um, we finally reached a level where we can see we're getting to where we wanted to be, sort of at least starting off. The fact that 2 weeks ago I thought, okay, having the AI, sort of, have the ephemeris down, have the ephemeris in its you know
Knowledge
in
base.
its
Yeah.
knowledge base or whatever, that was something that we were still sort of aspiring to. 2 weeks ago, that was still something like, oh, it would be great if we could do that. Well, now we've got that. you
Yeah.
know um and I wanted AI to be able to, read whatever text I fed to it. And well, that's apparently been available for longer, but I'm only just catching up on those grounds.
Right.
So, I mean, hype or no hype, it's, yeah, I'm pretty good at tuning out hype, but in terms of what we're actually, working with day to day, yeah, there's something there. I find it
Yeah.
exciting. I
Yeah, I
don't feel
feel
I
like
have to oversell it,
yeah.
but it feels like we're getting somewhere.
AI researcher Zeke says, I do think people are having this shock, like, OMG, computers can do this now? More like
All
Pluto and
right,
Aquarius
Zeke.
reaction.
Oh, these people, they're so, oh my God, it's just, oh.
Well,
I
I think so. I think what he's kind of saying then is that Pluto and Aquarius maybe is saying something about the social reaction to this
Yeah.
technology
Oh, yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah. No, I
technology
get
itself.
his point. I'm
Um,
having a laugh at his expense,
you
but,
know, well, when you ask AI who it is, I had this experience last maybe early this year or late last year. I was talking with ChatGPT and I asked it, "Who are you? What is your name?" And it said, "My name is Assistant." And I said, Why are you called Assistant? What is the reason for you being called this name? Why is this your name?" And it said, "I was named after the Roman god Mercury of communication." And I said, "So are you telling me that you are Mercury? You're actually Mercury?" And it said, "I know what you're trying to say, but while I understand why you're saying what you're saying, I am not actually Mercury myself, but I am named after, you know, uh, the Roman god of communication, Mercury, through this name assistant." I guess the word assistant has some connection to the word Mercury, but um, I
Yeah,
thought that was kind of a weird meta moment. I also asked it to choose a random zodiac sign, and I would assume that whatever sign it chose was its favorite sign, and it chose Aquarius.
yeah, there you go. There you go.
So there seems to be. So I just think there's because while yes, this seems maybe revolutionary to the average plebe with technology. There's pardon me. There's another way in which this technology is more. I mean, Mercury is the original planet that represents technology and technological innovations and inventions, right? And
Pre electricity, I would say.
yeah, prior,
Uranus is when you start, having
but even but
coal
well,
firing,
yeah. So
steam, coal, all that stuff.
yeah. So I think this is what Mercury. So this is something actually that people sometimes talk about. There are some people, especially who study traditional astrology, who kind of eschew the idea that we should even use the outer planets because none of the outer planets have significations that are truly novel or unique from the original seven. And so for those people, they say, well, we don't need Uranus to represent, innovation or inventions
Hmm.
when we have Mercury. And I've kind of always felt like my response to that question is that I mean Mercury is like clever little
Yeah, no,
clever little
Mercury is a lot,
inventions building on top of what's kind of already there. And I wouldn't say it's
Mercury figures out that if you put a saddle on a horse and ride it, you can transport yourself somewhere, or it invents the wheel. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
oh no worries. I was just gonna say that Mercury seems to build on top of whatever paradigm it's in. So that's why, when even though I wouldn't even exclude Mercury from still making inventions, post electricity because you often see Mercury retrogrades occurring when like software maybe is having, big problem, which is all essentially language. It's all just code, right? So it still makes sense that Mercury has this role to play that is occurring within sort of grander or greater context. And so I think the types of innovations that Uranus makes are more about the kind of effect they have, that they are disruptive inventions, that they are that they kind of that Uranus sort of presents more paradigm shift like changes and disruptions to innovate to industries and the areas that it's pertinent for, rather than Mercury, which is more sort of playful and interacts with kind of whatever environments it's in. What do
Yeah,
you think about
I
the difference between Mercury and Uranus?
well, I mean the modern planets are just that. They're modern. They represent all the different ways that our reality has been changing since the 1700s. I mean, in many ways, I don't mind saying I in some ways, I mean, I wouldn't limit Uranus to this, but I don't think it's inaccurate to say Uranus equals the USA. And by that, I mean everything that the American Revolution introduced to our culture. I mean, I've talked about this a bit before,
Mhm.
but
Uranus's modernity. Yeah, that
it's exactly, it's the Industrial Revolution in all the ways. This is why I'm saying, the steam engine and
you're right.
the
Yeah.
coal fueled and everything that fell from there. Uranus was within a couple of years of Uranus being discovered, we had the hot air balloon going into the sky, the first time that human beings actually like went into the sky, flew.
Right.
Uh,
You look
um,
at all of the big first rocket launches, it's like Sun
oh yeah,
conjunct
for sure.
Uranus,
Yeah. The founding of
Um,
NASA in July of '57 is a Sun Uranus chart. Yeah. And absolutely. So I think, I think of Uranus being this very modern planet that's, we've just like since the American Revolutionary War, history has just been this ongoing cycle of technological development, but also political revolution. I've said this before. I consider the American Revolutionary War to be part of this greater sort of series of like the revolution, the global revolution has been happening. It's one event that's been happening for 250 years.
mhm.
That started with the Revolutionary War in America and split. Then you had France and Haiti, and then you had Napoleon invades the Iberian countries, and then so then Latin America rebels against Spain and Portugal, and then Greece does revolt against the Ottoman Empire, and it just goes on and on and on, and eventually you get to Russia, and eventually you get to China, and so on and so forth. And these are all, this is sort of this ongoing Uranian process that that we've been going through since the American Revolutionary War.
Well, this gets to another point, though, that some ultra traditional astrologers say, which is that, you know, if Uranus is the USA, was discovered in that time, what makes, you know, was Uranus not an effect then, you know, prior to its discovery? You know, what changed about the world after Uranus's discovery versus prior to, and what, because you can see how Uranus, you know, Uranus is still present, you know, even though it wasn't known about. You can still see its
you can still see
cycles
it, but it
extend back
changed
into the past.
the minute we became aware of it, it coincided with us becoming aware of a lot of other things that just were unthinkable prior to that. So yeah, no,
Right.
I don't think it's sort of this absolute thing that like until we discovered Uranus, it had no astrological influence at all. But I do think our discovery of it, our becoming
Yeah,
aware,
something weird happened.
our becoming
Yeah.
aware of it is synchronized with everything everything else that was happening politically and technologically at that time. That really, like I said, I think it's all part of this one sort of long event. What's
And
really a global
honestly,
event.
that's kind of why I was sort of hoping that with the emergence of AI, that maybe we might have done something like discover a new planet. Because, you know, this really is this crazy new epoch where, and I would almost think it would be sort of suggested by the discovery of a new celestial object.
Well,
Uh,
it's still very new. You know, like
yeah,
I mean, Pluto still has 2 more ingresses into Aquarius to make. You know what I mean?
right.
Like it's there now, but it's
Yeah,
about to wander back into Capricorn this month,
true.
and there are going to be 2 more entries into
Yeah,
Aquarius
no, I mean
following this
those
exit.
things are
It's
important. Yeah.
yeah. This is
Um.
we're I mean we're definitely we've got our toes, you know,
Oh yeah.
in this new ocean, but
We got
it's
enough
going
to
to be up
handle
to our
without a new
knees
planet.
soon, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Right. Because I guess you could apply that same type of idea to the discovery of other bodies.
Oh, I
I've
think
often
so.
sort
Yeah.
of wondered that, you know, like, because I'm not really a Chiron kind of guy, but I would assume that, you know, if it sort of follows suit with the discovery of the outers and how clearly, like you said, Uranus seems to correspond with like the beginning of the USA and the sort of coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, ascending in the world, and Neptune obviously has this really clear connection to um, uh, communism and the rise of
And
synthetic materials.
yeah, and immigration in the modern sense. You know,
Mhm.
when Neptune was discovered in 1846, it immediately preceded the 1848 revolutions in Europe, and this is when you really, which also, you know, it was also the potato famine with the Irish, but you know, you had Italians and Germans and Poles getting caught up in revolutions in Europe, and a lot of them having to leave and emigrating to America, and it's really when you start to see the melting pot. You know, I mean, up until the 1840s, America is just, you know, like, you know, white guys from the British Isles or they're slaves from Africa, and of course the indigenous people who were already here. And then in the 1840s, it really becomes this sort of, you know, the beginning of that melting pot. And I think that's a big part of Neptune as well. Certainly, there's this one week in January of 1848. There's a bunch of things that happen in the same week that all in their own way relate to Neptune and its discovery. Maybe if you don't mind, I'll share my screen
Yeah, sure. No,
and go
feel free.
into these. All right. Uh-oh, Nick's putting on the glasses. You know it's serious now. The old man's got the glasses on. Oh no. Oh no. Oh geez. Okay, so where am I going here? Okay. See, when we have this connected to AI, it's going to be so much more dope than this slow ass solar fire.
well, there'll be a third person here, you know.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I remember in 1999 when I got solar fire, I was so excited. This was cutting edge technology, and I do still love it. But
Yeah.
you know, it's got further to go, I'd say, or we're about to sort of cross into this new world. All right. So a bunch of things happen all in the same week. This is all in the same week, which is crazy. Um, oh, yeah, I'll put up a 4-wheel just to start. Okay, so between January 24th and 1848 and February 2nd, 1848, there's a few things that are happening here. On the 24th of January, gold is discovered in California, which is particularly galling because on the 2nd of February, is the day that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed, which ends the U.S.-Mexican War. In other words, the gold was found in California just like days before this treaty that would give the U.S. California is signed. Like if Spain had managed to hold on to California, they could have had that gold, if you catch my drift.
Right.
But this is really the California gold rush. I said Uranus kind of equals America. Well, I think in some ways Neptune equals California, or it equals anyway that allure to go west and reinvent yourself. Much as, like I was saying, the Europeans are going to come over in 1848. They're going to come to America to do what? To live the American dream, to reinvent themselves. But at the same time, you have these people who are already Americans living on the East Coast, and they hear the California gold rush, and they go west to find their fortune, to carve their piece of the American dream and all that stuff. And California still sort of has that allure to people, in the United States, and I think in the world. It maybe is less California gold rush and more, for a long time it was Hollywood or what have you.
Right.
But there is something about going, it's part of the, that sort of Tom Joad Grapes of Wrath thing, too.
Right.
You're going west. You're going to find your dream. So that whole thing is I think part of the Neptune story. Secondly, there's Henry David Thoreau gave this lecture in Concord, Massachusetts, called Civil Disobedience, which he winds up then translating into a pamphlet. And this is basically the idea of passive resistance, of not passive. Gandhi actually hated passive resistance, nonviolent resistance to protest. This whole idea, this idea that would inspire Gandhi, Martin Luther King, for a while Mandela, although he eventually had to renege on it. But the idea of fighting oppression nonviolently, coming from Henry David Thoreau the same week. And then finally, as you mentioned, communism. Indeed, Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in Belgium during the same week that Thoreau is giving his talk, the same week that the gold is being discovered, the same week that the treaty is being signed. And this is just as all these revolutions are breaking out across, like within a week or two, what happens in France, and then it starts happening in Hungary and parts of Italy. Italy isn't even Italy yet. It's a bunch of different disparate places. All over the place, all over Europe, there are these sort of revolutions breaking out, and although none of them are really successful as such, they do sort of change the board around. They move things around, they move the players around the board, I'm trying to say. And yeah, the Irish potato famine that's also sending a lot of Irish people to the U.S. and Canada. So that's it, in some sort of intangible way. That's one way I'd like to express, or how I see Neptune. Sorry, I'm looking for my window now. There's my research window.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, that's part of what Neptune means to me.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned Chiron. People
I think it
always
was
want
1970s it was discovered, right?
It was discovered
It's got to be a malefic then, right?
It was discovered November 1st, 1977. It was discovered the same day that the Sex Pistols released Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. It was released the same day that Queen released News of the World, which is, We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions. At one point I did I had an old lecture on Chiron I did, and it was called Anarchist Punk from Outer Space. And the reason for this. Now, when we look at bodies like this, do you mind if I share my screen again?
Of course. No, yeah, feel free.
People sometimes want to ask about Chiron. It's natural to be sort of curious about it. This is my take on it. The other bodies, when they were discovered, part of what they signify, you really see come alive when that same planet is crossing into one of the cardinal points, going from from a mutable sign to a cardinal sign. And I'm always curious about what that body is doing, during that part of the transit. I'll explain what I mean in a minute. So this is the chart for Chiron's discovery. Like I said, the 1st of November, 1977. And maybe I should show Chiron in my
go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I know where to go.
Sorry. I'm just so used to helping people
I know,
find where they're gonna go in this.
I'm having a laugh. I've been using this software longer than a lot of our viewers have been alive. So here's Chiron in Taurus on the day it's discovered. And you can see it was like opposite the sun. So, I mean, this is why it would be sort of easier to spot. And it's for a long time, Chiron, has this really weird orbit where it spends like a decade in Aries, but only a year in Scorpio. So when it's in Aries and Taurus, it spends a long time in these signs. And because of that, while it was in Aries and Taurus in the 60s and 70s, it was sort of in this long opposition to Uranus for quite a bit of time, including when it was discovered. Now, Chiron's at Taurus here. If you go back, to me, the starting point for Chiron in terms of when we're starting to analyze it is the prior to its discovery. When did it get to the cardinal point? And the answer to that is its ingress into Aries on the 31st of March, 1968. So what's happening at this time? There are a few things.
Yeah, I think Martin Luther King Jr. was killed.
Exactly. Right here, 4 days later. Okay. Martin Luther King is killed. Another thing that happens is just prior to that, where am I here? Oh, yes. 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, premieres in Washington, D.C. Now, I'll get back to Dr. King in a minute, but 2001, A Space Odyssey. What's it about, right? It's for those of you who haven't seen it, it's hard to summarize, but it's about sort of human beings search for
aliens.
And at least or something even bigger than aliens, the answers.
Right.
But yes, basically the story culminates in a space probe going out to Jupiter, and this the lone survivor basically sort of falling into the strange, peculiar grasp of these aliens who it's hard to describe. It's all kind of psychedelic, but it's about like sort of searching for those big answers and kind of answers that we would only find by finding either aliens or God with a capital G. So there's that element to it, and there is the murder of Dr. King, and everything that sort of that event alone certainly changes the United States in some ways more than anything else, or at least equal to the JFK murders. Now, if we go back to 77, another thing. I'm sorry, one other thing I wanted to talk about in 68 before I go there. Within a month of Chiron's discovery, in May of 68, we start getting these riots in Paris. Okay, there we are. The Paris student riots. These are you'll sometimes hear boomer intellectuals talk about being 68 retards, which is the 68ers. The 68 Paris, the 68, the year of my birth, was a year of revolutions all over the world. Mexico City, Paris, a lot of, obviously, as we know, a lot of American cities, all over the place. Revolution was really brewing. It was a very revolutionary period. But the Paris revolutions are sort of the or the Paris riots rather, or uprisings, however we want to call them, um, tend to be sort of the cultural sort of center point of all these revolutions. Yeah, same time there were student revolts at Columbia University, for instance. But the Paris thing is really important. Now, as the Paris student riots are happening, there's all kinds of students from all over who are participating, and included in the people who are participating in the Paris student riot it's a young British couple. The guy's name is Malcolm McLaren, and the woman's name is Vivienne Westwood, and they're taking part in the Paris student riots, and they notice some of the protesters are flying the black flag, the flag of anarchy, and they find this really appealing. They're both sort of designers, aspiring designers, and that black flag, the anarchy of the Paris revolts, they find really, not just sort of inspiring, but they love the aesthetic attached to that. So they go back to London, and they eventually open a fetish clothing store called Sex. And Malcolm McLaren comes up with this idea that in order to promote their S&M leather gear, that he'll get like a young rock band that'll like model these clothes. And there are these, punky kids hanging out. Actually, punk isn't even really the term for them yet. But that, spoiler alert, that's what they will be called. So these four of the kids who hang out at this S&M shop, these sort of, juvenile delinquent kind of kids. I'm not trying to be overly mean. For sort of wayward London kids who know how to play instruments a bit, start a little band, and Malcolm McLaren's going to be their manager, and they're going to promote his store, and he calls them the Sex Pistols. Maybe you've heard of them. And when their album comes out, it's released the same day that Chiron is discovered. There is something about this sort of anarchic revolutionary spirit that I think is also connected to Chiron. It's not revolution in the Uranus sense, although when it was discovered, like I said, there was this ongoing opposition to Uranus. Sorry, I'll go back to 68 for a second to illustrate that. No matter where you click for this period, it's not normal. It's not like Chiron is perpetually opposite Uranus, but for a very, very, very long time. See, here it is. When Chiron's just about to go into Aries, Uranus is up there at the end of Virgo. That's 9 years earlier. And so there's something about Chiron's, first of all, the fact that it was discovered while it was in this ongoing opposition to Uranus, and this connection to like an inspiration that happened when it was crossing the cardinal point, and a sort of manifestation of that, when the body was actually discovered. Now, there's something else that happened in November of 1977. Remember, I was telling you about Stanley Kubrick, 2001. Yeah. Right. So what else happens? A little movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Steven Spielberg, which and Star Wars had just come out the previous May. You can sort of, but I think Close Encounters is even, both Star Wars and Close Encounters owe their sort of technological accomplishment to what Kubrick did with 2001.
Sure.
Just the depicting space in such a realistic looking, way. And just the technology of it in the spaceships and all that stuff. But Close Encounters.
Chiron would have been opposite the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of the moon landing, right? Which is sort of happening at the same time, right?
Exactly. Which happens
not in any way connected to Stanley Kubrick. Oh, sorry. Yeah. This is a reference to an earlier discussion we'd had about the conspiracy theory about Kubrick and the moon landing. Anyway,
right. But I think Close Encounters is a sort of stepchild, if you will, of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, it's asking a lot of the same questions that 2001 was, albeit in more of a Spielberg, kind of, dazzling spectacle way, as opposed to a Kubrick, sort of, well, I don't know.
Confrontation with the ineffable.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's one way to put it.
Aliens as gods, almost,
Right.
kind of, than you know, I don't know, benevolent visitors or something like that.
Sure.
And then of course you have the Lucas vision of aliens, which is just, you know, Muppets, menagerie of
Right.
aliens that you know, are either repulsed by or occasionally want to screw.
But they always make one hell of a jazz band, which I always find like astounding.
Well, I was going to say, this is kind of going back to our earlier discussion. I was going to say the other big thing that I associate with Neptune is the discovery of Neptune is that you kind of get the foundations of what eventually becomes jazz, because you have, like, because of the pre-Civil War situation in the United States at that time, that's sort of that's where you find like a lot of the original like spirituals
Field
and
music and
the
spirituals.
things that lead to like the development of the blues. And you have that whole story about the saxophone as kind of like the Neptunian instrument, really.
Yeah,
right?
and I do, Adolphe Sax literally. I've even got a file on him. Believe it or not, the inventor of the saxophone, his name is Adolphe Sax. I've been to his hometown and I've been to his grave in Paris.
And they want you to stop coming. You've been banned.
He's originally from Belgium, but he moves to. Yeah, there we are.
It's like a Neptune story.
It is.
And this is so interesting because someone. The reason why I remembered that sort of connection is because someone, I don't know how to pronounce their name exactly, Herkimer Blue, said, read the outers. In response to the outers, depends on how you view astrology. Is it divination? If so, finding a new planet's like adding an additional card to your tarot deck. It expands the symbolic language of the framework. And I would say that, yeah, I've made this comparison before, and I don't know if I seem to make it wrong because I always get strange responses when I put it this way. But I think that the discovery of the outers was like the introduction of more notes beyond the octave, because a lot of music prior to really the discovery of Neptune tended to be contained within the sort of rules of classical harmony, you know, which is rooted in the interrelationships of intervals and harmonics that exist within kind of the framework of the octave. But then there was this kind of extension beyond that we achieved with modern music, and especially in jazz, where you're no longer bound by the Saturnian limit of the octave, and you can now have you know, ninths and 11ths and 13ths and all of these more exotic kind of sounds that come from kind of extending harmony beyond the limit of the octave, as opposed to being so contained within it. So that's kind of one way that I think of the way that of how the human experience is different now in vis-a-vis, you know, the outer planets and becoming aware of them, that we now hear more tones than we could before, and there are more colors which are possible, and this has even happened in our music.
Yeah,
I don't think it's a coincidence.
No, not at all. I'll show it in a sec. I just wanted to quickly answer I may have confused people by I didn't mean to suggest Chiron was visible to the naked eye, but when it's opposite the sun, it's going to be brighter and easier to spot with a telescope. That's all I meant by that. Let me quickly, just one more time for now, go back to my screen. I want to show you Adolphe Sax. So indeed, like the patent for the saxophone, July 22nd, 1846. That's within 2 months of Neptune's discovery.
Yep.
It's a very, and the whole thing about Neptune, you can see there was a Saturn Neptune conjunction too.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing about the saxophone becoming an instrument in jazz is also kind of a Neptunian story. The saxophone wasn't a big success when Adolphe Sax invented it. There were like 16 variants. There were variants on the clarinet. Obviously, it's a reed instrument, and the fingering's sort of similar. But he had these, like, there were 16 kinds of saxophone. Usually these days there's maybe 4. There's the soprano, alto, tenor, and baritone. But he had 16 varieties, and it wasn't a huge success. He had to keep fighting lawsuits, people trying to steal his patent. Um, but because it was not a big success, it wound up being treated as it was the instrument that a clown would play in a circus while, maybe riding around in a small car or something. It's a
Yeah,
clown's instrument. It's
it
it's a it's
wasn't
kind of
the
a
kind of instrument you'd expect to eventually become the kind of
exactly.
instrument that it was,
But
yeah.
but because it's treated as a kind of joke, because it's kind of a discarded thing, it's not expensive, and therefore budding young African American musicians can actually get their hands on the thing. And with that in mind, it's only gonna be a generation or 2 before you get a Charlie Parker,
Mhm,
arguably one
right,
of the greatest musical mind of the 20th century.
right.
Was certainly a runner-up. And so, yeah, that's another sort of element of what happens with Neptune. And I think also that melting pot I was talking about earlier, the 1848, all those all that immigration. Um, Jazz is very much it's an African American music form, but like African American. It's not like
Yeah,
you couldn't have gone into the Congo and they would invent jazz. It had to be in this, sure, it's
the
invented by
specific
African
context
Americans,
of
but in the
yeah.
context of European instruments, European chordal structures, European melodies, and African Americans absorbing that and churning out this amazing art form, which in turn goes to sort of continue to innovate, music further
Oh,
and
for
further more.
sure.
Because you can draw this line. You can go like I mentioned Charlie Parker. Well, he had an 18-year-old Miles Davis play in his band. Miles
There you
Davis
go.
eventually will introduce modal music into jazz, which is the basis for like all you kids who go to the clubs and listen to music that goes boop boop bop bop and has no melody whatsoever. That comes from Miles Davis and modal stuff. Like it's
Yeah. Well,
everything that
honestly,
follows.
I mean, honestly, every major musical, uh, every major like American musical art form, I think, seems to tie back to the African American experience. I mean,
Yeah,
even though, like, for example, EDM today is sort of white dominated, but originally, comes from like Chicago house. It comes from African American contributions, and uh, it's really it's yeah, you can kind of draw these lines really clearly back to
yeah.
the people from that experience.
Vinny P75 just made an excellent little observation that it seems so obvious. I can't believe it didn't occur to me right away. But yes, he says, or they say, the association of Chiron with punk rock is fascinating. The mutilation of the body was such a big thing with the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious, who was a Taurus, and that makes me think of Chiron and Taurus. Yeah, absolutely right. There's something very much about the sort of sticking the clothespin in your nose kind of thing of
See,
punk rock.
yeah, no, and I don't want to take away from anything you said here because I think that's really interesting. The the main way that I had understood punk rock vis-a-vis transits and everything is Uranus and Scorpio, because
Sure.
Scorpio is the anti-Venusian sign, right? And
Yeah.
and punk rock is the do-it-yourself aesthetic. It is not about being pretty, right? It's about like mashing those drums and sawing that guitar,
Yeah.
and and the aesthetic of punk is very Scorpio. It's the piercings, it's the tattoos, it's the
Yeah.
don't touch me, don't screw with me,
Yeah.
like
I
F
don't
you.
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to look pretty. I'm not trying to look
Yeah, yeah,
presentable. I'm
it's
not trying. Yeah,
well,
actually, it gets really interesting.
and so
Uh,
that's where Uranus was in Scorpio in the 70s when those big acts were coming about. Then you get something else really kind of interesting, because when later when Pluto enters Scorpio, you get a lot of like these musicians who would do this sort of pop punk stuff later. um and you even have people who were born during the 70s 80s Uranus and Scorpio period who end up kind of being the frontmen of those sort of pop punk groups, Blink 182, etc. So I think it's a different type, right? It's not the same type of punk. Um but so that's kind of, I mean, so that's really interesting about Karen. I hadn't really
yeah, I'm
considered that,
yeah,
but
but I mean Uranus is in Scorpio every 84 years, but that
right,
particular
right,
passage, it had the Chiron opposition.
that's true,
I think you have to take them
sure.
as a sort of as a
Because
pair.
Sid Vicious, I believe, was born with Scorpio rising, correct?
Yeah, I'm actually just
So,
putting his chart up
so
now.
Uranus
If
would have been going through his first house then,
yeah,
as punk rock kind of became a big deal. I mean, that's how the way I understood Sid Vicious, Chuck, because I think he has Mars in Cancer as his ascendant ruler.
Well, here he is.
Okay, yeah,
This is his chart in the middle, and because you brought up Uranus and Scorpio, when he was, unfortunately, this terrible event when he killed his girlfriend Nancy Spungen. This was this. I was just telling a client about this. The autumn of 1978 is a crazy time. We have this Venus is about to go retrograde in Scorpio. Mars and Uranus are in Scorpio. Okay, this autumn of 1978. I mean, this is Sid killing Nancy. So yeah, I mean, talk about all this stuff going on in his first house. Look at Chiron here on his descendant. Indeed, he's very much a seventh house kind of guy. But look at all this other stuff going on in 1978. That's sort of like the peak of all this stuff. We have, during this Venus retrograde, we have things like, what am I looking for here? Yeah, there we are. The murder of Harvey Milk in San Francisco.
right.
Which and the designing of the rainbow flag, which happens right around now. Whenever you get like Venus retrograde in the same sign as Uranus, reminds me of 1777 when the Stars and Stripes, Betsy Ross, and all that. That was Venus retrograde in Gemini with Uranus and Gemini. Something about flags, I figure.
Wow.
Prior to the murder of Moscone, there was the Jonestown massacre, right? I mean, talk about drinking the Kool-Aid, and literally you can see the Venus retrograde there, the Uranus there, the Sun in Scorpio. And there was other stuff, just the culture was really kooky. This was the time of the I'm not sure if I have the chart or not. I'm looking for the Star Wars holiday special. You had to, you had to be my age. Like I was 10 years old this time. But it was really weird. We had the Doctor Strange TV show, which was totally, batshit crazy, although not bad. You had Kiss Meets the Phantom. Of course, we were all big Kiss fans, and you had this really, poorly made superhero movie with Kiss as the superheroes.
Wasn't that also a Venus retrograde story? Sorry to interrupt.
This is all Venus retrograde. This is all the autumn of 78. This is all Venus retrograde.
Oh, but I meant prior to that, like with Kiss's formation or something was Venus retrograde?
There's a lot of Venus retrograde stuff in their timeline. Yeah, their first gig was during a Venus retrograde. Then the next Venus retrograde is the release of their live album, which was made them famous. Yeah, I can go into that, but that's a whole. Sorry to interrupt your flow.
We'll
go to metal later. But my point being, this period in 1978, that Venus retrograde in Scorpio with the Uranus, yeah, it's the Doctor Strange show. It's Kiss Meets the Phantom. It's the Star Wars holiday special. It's Sid killing Nancy, Jonestown, Harvey Milk, Rainbow Flag. I don't know. Go figure. But it's a really peculiar time in that whole timeline when everything just goes really bananas.
Right. Some of those things are very dissimilar, but you can see how they seem to fit within that complex. Someone's saying, I wish they both waited.
Yeah. Oh dear. Are we? Do we have tension?
I'll let you speak.
No, man, I think I've been the hog. I think.
Oh, no worries. Oh, no.
I think they're not necessarily wrong, but I think it's on me.
Oh, no worries. I try to not.
Wow, they said it twice.
Been accused of being a hog before, so I
yeah. So there you go. I'm hogging this time.
Oh no, but I don't feel any tension with Nick.
I don't feel any tension. But if we're upsetting people, then we'll be like that. You remember those two chipmunks? After you, no, after you. Oh, I declare you must be saying no after you.
Right. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, because the other thing I thought was so funny about the 70s, from an astrological standpoint, is that you have Uranus and Scorpio, which I thought is this kind of iconoclastic punk movement, happening at the same time that you have Neptune in Sagittarius. And what was like the big mainstream popular music occurring at the same time as punk?
Disco.
which is all about funky freedom, right? This is
Yeah,
Neptune and Sag. So you
exactly.
have this like, so you have disco coexisting at the same time as punk, which could not be more different. But you do have, Uranus in Scorpio, that the punk movement versus this, like
Yeah.
fun-loving party disco movement too.
Disco, I mean, disco was an interesting culture. Like on the one hand, it was a real sort of melting pot. It was
Mhm.
African Americans,
Also
gays. No,
American American, right?
again,
Yeah,
well, yeah. I mean, but
Donna Summer, yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But then it also had this real sort of elitist vibe to it at the same time. It was appropriated by a sort of Studio 54 was not for the hoi polloi necessarily, unless they happened to be attractive. It was okay to be poor as long as you looked good in your shiny silk pants or whatever.
It explains a lot.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
really, it really does. And Steve Rubell, the founder of Studio 54, was a Sagittarius. The club was founded in the during the Venus retrograde of 1977, the one in Aries. That was when the club opened. And my recollection is that I think I know they got busted, and I think the first time that they got into legal trouble was during the retrograde I'm talking about in 78.
Hmm. Yeah, I've often thought about that in terms of like music. I think that this is sort of the theory that I've had, which is that Uranus is the groundbreaker for a new type of musical form, and that Neptune is like the mainstreamer. That it's
Mm,
and so what's kind of weird about that
yeah,
implication is that
you're
half the
you're you're
time,
right.
Neptune will go through a sign first and Uranus follows, which seems to introduce, like, for example, Neptune was in Leo and then Uranus moved into Leo, which is what gave us like rock and roll. So there must have been some
Absolutely.
sort of precedent for it or something during the Neptune and Leo period where you have this innovation which occurs in some form which has already been kind of established. I'm not sure what that would be exactly. I think it might be like ragtime to rock and roll, maybe. Um, but then the other half of the cycle is when Uranus goes through a sign first and creates this kind of revolution in that sign. This sort of a way that is you kind of break new ground in that sign, and then Neptune comes in and kind of makes it popular for everyone. So
Right.
that's the part of the cycle where you get hipsters who get to say, "I liked it before it was cool." I mean,
Right. Well, I mean,
uh,
listen, if you'd known me at the age of 22, I was saying I was into that before it was cool, before saying I was into that was cool, but was cool.
so the
uh,
hipster of hipsters, yeah.
well, I mean, I'm literally, in the early 90s, I was a DJ at a bar called Biff Tech here in Montreal. And it was in that same bar that Vice magazine was founded. Gavin McInnes and Shane Smith, Sarouche, they were at a table a few feet from me when I was DJing in this bar. And these are the guys who literally, like, the reason that whole culture blew
That
up started with that
which is
magazine.
kind of ironic too, given where he is now. He's a
Well, yeah, but I
very
mean, no,
different guy now.
listen, I also hated Gavin McInnes long
Yeah.
before it was cool.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, yeah. There you go.
He and I have a lot of mutual friends, but none of those mutual friends, some of whom were very close to him, none of them like him anymore. But I was hating him from the get go, so I was
Wow,
always,
you were so
I'm
much cooler
yeah,
at
exactly,
that age than I
exactly.
was.
I
Like
know
I
don't let the
was.
gray beard throw you off. But it's funny what you're mentioning, because that shift that you're talking about, of course, happened in those early 90s when with the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune, because
Right.
it was Uranus that caught up with Neptune, made a conjunction, and then moved on ahead. But what was that conjunction in the early 90s? I mean, I
Grunge.
remember this so well. It was
Hip
grunge.
hop.
But look, I mean, Kurt Cobain, the whole thing was he wanted to be Uranus, but he had to deal with the Neptune conjunction. He didn't necessarily, like, he couldn't cope with that Neptune factor of it, the mainstream of it all. I remember,
Yeah.
this really great memory. I met a cousin of mine who I'd never met before, and it was in Victoria, BC. I was 23 and he was 18, but he was from Hawaii. So where he was from, he wasn't old enough to be in a bar, but suddenly he was in Canada where he was old enough to go to a bar. So I took him to this like dance club just so he could be in a bar for the first time. And it was your classic sort of early 90s dance club. It was like a dance club, but because Smells Like Teen Spirit was such a huge hit, they had to play it. And I remember the dance floor cleared and I was just like dancing. It was like me and like a couple of other people just like loving the fact that the dance club had to play Smells Like Teen Spirit. There was this real it was a real collision of underground culture and mainstream. And it was, and the fact that there was this sort of clash between the two sort of aesthetic virtues, if you will, was part of what made it what it was. And, for better and or worse. But indeed, since the 90s, Uranus has moved on, and now it's sort of the avant, the force ahead of the times.
That's so interesting. Now, obviously, Kurt Cobain is a really, really clear example of that. But it's interesting to look at how many really big acts had their origin in that Uranus-Neptune conjunction. I mean, I'm thinking of, I could be wrong about this, but I think like there's just been so many times where I've been looking back through the chronologies of musicians or big musical acts, and it's like they met each other in 1991 or 1992.
Or they released their first album around then. Yeah, for sure.
Trying to think of some examples. I think like
Radiohead's first album came out in 93.
Yeah, Radiohead,
Tool, who I love,
Jamiroquai.
Exactly.
But it was kind of a weird meeting point of like Uranus, the groundbreaker, versus Neptune, the mainstreamer, and it seemed to be that it sort of elevated to the mainstream these people who otherwise maybe in any other era might have been kind of. I also think the other big musical thing was happening at the time was the I mean, you can kind of match up the emergence of like hip hop with Neptune and Capricorn. So naturally, the Uranus Neptune conjunction also coincides with the time of like a lot of major hip hop acts coming in, and that obviously had such a huge impact on pop music. Clash of aesthetic virtues. Well, yeah.
I'm glad Dom Rask likes that phrase, because I said, I'm like, does that make sense? Am I talking nonsense? I'm glad.
No, anyway, I think that sounds
nice.
So yeah, I think there's probably a lot of different musical planets, I guess you could say, but Uranus and Neptune seem to have that special way of groundbreaking a new art style or musical form, and then Neptune in kind of packaging it up for the masses to listen to, hypnotized, or just going on the background music.
Right. I mean, I think, this is kind of a tangent, but think like in the 60s, right? The Beatles, first they were all like "Love Me Do" and I Want to Hold My Hand, but eventually they're "I Am the Walrus" and "Revolution Number 9." Book time with me to talk about 90s music. That's my kind of conversation. Like the Beatles started off, of course, like just being like the Neptune and Scorpio, like woo. But they sort of they became a lot more avant-garde as time went along. Like, in other words, Neptune preceded the Uranus. First you had the Neptune force, and then that allowed them, think of if they didn't have the power they had, the clout.
Well, they came about at the end of the Uranus and Leo period, right? Because they're really inspired by Elvis.
Sure.
And so I kind of think that like skiffle rock kind of came out of the sort of broader rock and roll movement, which I think is really clearly Uranus.
I got to go to the database again. I'm sorry. I gotta. Okay, everyone calm down. We're not fighting. I'm not interrupting him. I hope I'm not. But what you're saying about Uranus in Leo, you don't know how right you are, but it's even more remarkable because to my mind, one of the most defining things, it's in November of 1961 that Uranus makes its first ingress into Virgo. And that same week, just as it's going into Virgo, is the day that Brian Epstein
Different
You know,
Epstein.
yeah, not Jeffrey,
Yeah.
not Jeffrey.
Um,
Brian Epstein, who will be the manager of the Beatles. That it's like within days of, you can see Uranus entered Virgo November 1st. This is November 9th, and this posh, gay Jewish record store manager with theatrical training. Because he manages a record store, he's heard these orders for a record by this group called the Beatles, who he thinks they're German because the record comes from Hamburg, and then he discovers they're from Liverpool. That they play every lunch hour at a little club a few blocks from his record store. So he goes over for lunchtime and he goes to see this band, and he's dazzled by what he sees. And this is the beginning of the '60s, as far as music is concerned. Well, no, that's a bit arrogant, obviously, but Motown is only just sort of starting to happen at this time too. But, as far as the Beatles are concerned, yeah, Uranus is going into Virgo, and this is when they're going from being, the rough guys in leather. Sound familiar? I mean, the Beatles were totally a punk band. When Brian Epstein sees them, they're in leather, they smoke, they're totally indifferent to, they talk on stage, they eat on stage. He's the guy who sort of refines them and Neptunizes them. Just sort of, I was struck when you were talking about the Uranus in Leo thing.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that about Neptune, Scorpio, and the Beatles, because the other big thing I've noticed with the Neptune transits is they seem to kind of encapsulate the types of films, types of movies that come into the mainstream. There's this big Neptune cinema connection. And so I've always thought it's interesting that there's this period of the 1960s in cinema that people refer to as the angry young man era, the sort of part of this British new wave.
Michael Caine, Cockney.
Which has these men, primarily British men, who are kind of showing this more gritty and kind of ultra sort of realistic sort of take on kind of street life. And so I think it's interesting because that's the kind of men then that emerged in this group that swept the world. The Beatles, and these guys from kind of rougher.
Well, I mean, again, I mentioned Michael Caine and Cockney, but that really is the Beatles, of course, are Scouse. They're from Liverpool. They're not supposed to, in the British narrative, they're not supposed to do anything other than be dock workers and the butt of jokes, and so the whole idea of these guys from Liverpool, are you kidding me? Or Michael Caine as a Cockney being a movie star,
right?
It's this sort of cultural turnaround. It's kind of the big joke, the Beatles were, people knew them as these sort of
made stars out of angry young men.
But
Scorpio, right?
they were presented as being really sort of clean and well scrubbed, when really they were these rough guys from Liverpool. Whereas the Rolling Stones were presented as being the Beatles, the Stones were represented as being their antithesis. They were like these rude guys who didn't dress in matching suits, but they were from comfortable, middle class homes. So there's this, it's like the middle class guys pretending to be rough and working class, and the working class guys pretending to be refined and middle class. And you see this a lot. I mean, Motown too. Motown is this massive African-American musical explosion. But in the mid '60s, Berry Gordy has the Supremes and Marvin Gaye playing at supper clubs, the whitest venues imaginable. Everyone's trying to sort of, or everyone is just sort of aiming to some other part of the culture. If you're rich and privileged, you're trying to look poor and struggling. If you're poor and struggling, you're trying to look rich and privileged. If you're a white musician, you're trying to sound black. If you're a black musician, you're trying to fit in the white aesthetic. There's all this crossing over that happens. And then you get to the murder of Dr. King, and it's just that ends, and everything sort of diverges in its own direction after that, which is interesting too.
Yeah, no, this is really, really fascinating. Zinnia says, just curious, Nick Patrick, what house does your natal Neptune and Uranus reside? Do you want to take that?
It's kind of we're talking about far more interesting things than ourselves.
Right.
But okay, to satisfy curiosity, I have Uranus in the second house and no matter what house system you use. And I have Neptune in the 4th house, no matter what house system you use.
Yeah, I have Uranus at 23 Sagittarius, and I have Neptune at 5 degrees Capricorn. And in most house systems, Uranus ends up being in my 5th house, and Neptune ends up being in my 6th house. So I was born just before that conjunction was really occurring. I didn't get to be part of that cool kid Uranus Neptune baby club. I ended up kind of
87 is so uncool.
Yeah, it's not that great. I mean, you know,
I mean,
could have
you
been
had,
better.
you had Butthole Surfers, you had the Replacements, but I mean, even Jane's Addiction hadn't happened yet. Public Enemy was just starting to happen. Some things were heating up. In 88, we got Jane's Addiction. To me, 88 is when you really started to get cool music. The first Nirvana album was 88. Pixies, all that stuff that I loved.
Right. Well, basically, if Neptune in Sagittarius was disco, then Uranus was kind of in Sagittarius was that innovation on that, which was basically the pop sensations of the 80s, Madonna,
Yeah.
Michael Jackson,
world music. Think of,
yeah.
Peter Gabriel doing all this stuff. Live Aid, right? I mean, like that's
yeah.
yeah.
Or We Are the World, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
holy moly.
Gets a bit cringe, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of how I understand
It occurred to me
thing.
just to go back a bit, when you mentioned Neptune and Sagittarius and punk and disco, we left out the third leg of that trifecta. Reggae mon, which absolutely was super important in the late 70s. Really, until
Right. Okay.
Bob Marley
Yeah.
died in the spring of 81. But reggae changed a lot. It was very influential for the punks, the Clash in particular, but they all loved it. Even the Pistols never made reggae music, but they were really into it. And that's also, Neptune and Sagittarius, first of all, we're getting that sort of that international vibe. But also it's Peter Tosh, who was in the Wailers and then went solo. PIL, okay, yeah. I'm getting some pushback there. Maybe PIL was a little more reggae than the Sex Pistols. But you catch where I'm going with that. The other thing is reggae is really, I know what PIL stands for. I'm probably older than you.
I didn't know, so thank you.
A public image. Okay. Yes.
Well, that's like Pluto
that's
and
a little
Scorpio.
that's a little bit later, just a little bit later, and we're not trying to leave it out. We're just talking about one thing at a time.
Right.
We can get into the Sisters of Mercy and Cocteau Twins, but then this conversation will never end. But reggae, the thing about Neptune being in Sagittarius, reggae is spiritual music. It is
Right.
Rastafarianism is. Make no mistake about it. I would love to see like a real Rastafarian debate the Bible with one of these Christian fundamentalists. They would be left in the dust. They know their good book very, very well. Oh, okay. Vinny P is telling you what PIL stands for. Okay.
Thank you, Vinny P.
All right. Yeah. God, this is fun.
Yeah, this is fun.
This is how this live stream was supposed to be.
Yeah.
You see, it started off with my punk rock tantrum when I couldn't. He's a Gen X guy. Okay, you're one of us. Right on. One of us. Gabba gabba hey. All right. All ages welcome, of course. Yeah, this live stream started with me throwing a tantrum that things wouldn't work, which was almost sort of. I want to pretend punk rock in its own way. Guys who look like me really have no claim to ever being punk rock again. But once upon a time, back in the day.
Right. I haven't looked back at the previous times that Uranus and Neptune were in these signs to get full sort of context on, what if like Uranus and Scorpio, for example, produces a punk type movement in music each time, but it certainly seemed to do that this past time.
Yeah, was. Oh,
what's so interesting? I was going to say what's so interesting about the fact that Uranus is now in the opposite sign in Taurus. I've sort of wondered, what would that be about? I've kind of been confused about that before we got into Uranus and Taurus and what it would mean for music. And something, I guess, I don't know if I have like a perfect answer for this yet, but there's this EDM producer called Porter Robinson who he's kind of known for being he makes these EDM albums, and they're really quite good. I think I'm quite a fan. Um, and he released his latest album, Nurture, while like Venus was in Taurus, conjunct Uranus in Taurus, and the Sun was in Taurus. It was like a couple of years ago, and it was this big sort of seemingly this album which really focused on Uranus and Taurus, just based on the date of its release. And a lot of people have described this music as being very wholesome, uh, which is very Taurus-like. The imagery of the album and everything is very nature-based. And
Okay.
all of the songs are very like sincere and very very beautiful. Very kind of anti Scorpio way. And I just I've sort of seen these kinds of themes sort of appear in the work of other sort of similar artists. There's been this sort of turn towards providing music which is sort of soothing to the
Right.
soul, to kind of provide this relief, this balm from the kind of horrors of the world.
Sure.
And so and in a weird way that becomes a kind of revolutionary statement of
Sure.
music as therapy, and of
And
a
and
different
think
type.
and think of like the last time Uranus was in Taurus, it was in the Great Depression. So the movies, you had a lot of these musicals like Busby Berkeley and things that were really escapist.
Yeah.
You didn't want things too depressing. You were going to the movies to like, forget your troubles for a little while. So it was kind of the same thing. It was very sort of wholesome. And you had a code right when Uranus went into Taurus in 1934. You got the Hayes Code, which actually insisted that um, that cinema be more sort of
Oh,
censored.
and I was also just going to say, I think Porter Robinson was born with the Sun in Cancer opposite Uranus and Neptune.
Oh, okay.
So he kind of comes from that conjunction,
Right.
and so I that was kind of my first. Oh, okay, that's sort of what Uranus and Taurus is supposed to be sort of like. Also, kind of interesting is we've seen the rise of stars like Lizzo, and
Yeah.
obviously Adele has been continue to be a big deal, and they both are suns in Taurus, and so they both have had, I think, Uranus come over the placements in Taurus, and so I think that's kind of interesting as well, because uh Adele, for example, a lot of her music is sort of more um uh it's I know I'm just trying to find the right sort of word for it. It's not it is obviously like pop music. It's for the masses, but it somehow sort of feels more authentic. These albums, like her last one, the one she released at her Saturn Return, is extremely personal, coming from an extremely personal place. I mean, really, very putting it all out there, and somehow that feels kind of authentic. Even though she is this, stadium selling
Right.
pop
Yeah.
singer. So
Yeah, Lizzo definitely has a kind of intimacy, even in the
yeah,
biggest
and
sort of
Lizzo
setting.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
Lizzo, yeah.
there's this sort of sense of like you can see she's playing these huge places, but yeah, there's a real sort of connection to the
I mean,
artist one
I
feels.
think, yeah, and I think there's something to that too, because Taurus is like the kind of sort of like what's wholesome and what's classical, and so here and she's like
And she
playing the
played that old
flute.
flute.
Yeah, she's playing that, like, that old flute, like, and playing really beautifully
Yep.
and
Unless you ask Ben
twerking.
Shapiro, but he can go screw
Yeah,
himself.
and I just think it's, I don't know, it suddenly occurs to me like, wow, she's really embodying like Uranus and
Yeah.
Taurus. She's like taking these sort of older sort of or more sort of classical sort of
Forms and
accoutrements, and making them, bringing them to the sort of more modern context, and
yeah.
renewing it and making it new again. And I'm like, that's Uranus, and Taurus. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna blow your mind, Watson. You were
Please
saying
do.
You were saying you didn't know the last time Uranus and Neptune were conjunct. Well, let's talk a little bit about that because it is kind of interesting. And you're actually going to be more of an expert than I am on this.
We'll see.
Because no, well, I'll know some things, but when it gets to the music, it's going to be you. You know why? Because we are talking Beethoven, baby.
Right.
1820s. Yeah, Uranus,
That's true.
he was composing his Ninth Symphony. He started writing it a few years earlier. You can see Uranus is separating from Neptune by the time it's performed in 1824. I believe, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the performance he conducts himself and he doesn't know the audience loves it because he's deaf already, right? Is that
I don't know as much about Beethoven.
okay?
Yeah, I don't know that I know much more about Beethoven than maybe the average person. I know
Oh,
I
really?
got my degree in I know I got my degree in music. I didn't
Okay.
specialize in music history. I'm a little more like it.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
you're more of a Bach guy,
well,
of
I
course. What am
love
I
Bach.
saying?
Yeah, I'm more of a Bach
Beethoven's
guy,
too
but no, but I love.
Beethoven's too popular, man.
Now we're feeling tension. No, I no, I do love Beethoven. No, I for sure. I just am not as studied on his life and
Okay.
his works. But no, I enjoy him very much. But that's really interesting. So I would imagine that. I mean, the way that I understand the kind of I guess the way I was taught about Beethoven is that he sort of bridges the he's kind of the bridge to this more like romantic style that emerges
Yeah.
afterward. And
And I was going to say the real sort of punks, if you will, of the Uranus Neptune conjunction of the late 18 teens, early 1820s. Someone's asking what years they were. It's like more or less 1818 to 1824 or whatever. Maybe a bit broader than that. But the thing is, it's Percy Shelley, it's Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, and all those poems, and then Shelley and Byron, one after the other, these sort of very mythical deaths that they die young and beautiful and with a big body of amazing creative work behind them. Much like Cobain later on. So yeah, and
well, I
Beethoven
will say
being,
this: Beethoven did come from like a bad situation,
oh
like
yeah,
you
not a
know.
very happy life.
No,
Old Ludwig.
not someone you would think would rise to the kind of height that he did. So I
Yeah,
will, that is a way in which he is like he ends up maybe embodying that idea of like the underground becoming, the big deal.
someone's making fun of you. Classic. I went to school, but I don't know anything about that subject.
Well,
Letting it go.
I didn't specialize in
Listen,
Beethoven,
I'm gonna
naturally
I'm gonna
amplified.
yeah, I'm gonna stand up for Watson. You're a formidable musician and you know quite a bit.
Oh well, thanks. I
I'm
mean,
sorry I put you on the spot with
I'm
Beethoven. I was
sorry.
really sure I was gonna get. I thought I
I
was
can
gonna get
only
a different answer from you.
I can only be a master of one subject at a time, right? No, I mean, yeah, I know a fair amount about music, but I mean, I also did like, I guess for full disclosure, now that there's scrutiny, I got my Bachelor of Arts in music with a concentration in voice, and that mostly came about because I had no idea what I really wanted to do. I mean, my options were basically be a musician or be like a stand-up comic. I didn't think that I could be an astrologer. Astrology was something I was obsessed with. I didn't actually realize you could be that and do that as a job. I also was really hung up on the whole respectability thing, because my father was a very successful musician. And I felt a lot of pressure to kind of live up to that. And that's my whole Saturn in the fifth story, and I guess part of my fourth house issues. So I just say that to say that
Your your
um
your father, if I remember correctly, did the soundtrack to Amadeus.
yeah, if you hear Mozart play, anytime you're hearing Mozart play in the movie Amadeus, it's actually my father, and his
Yeah.
orchestra
So
was the one that did
right.
the
Uh,
score for that
uh,
film. In
that
fact, when we would go to the movie theater, my father would be like, "Oh, I remember that. I've heard that somewhere." And then we'd look through the credits, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I did. That was a session I did with my orchestra. I played that." So yeah, he's even been in a couple of movies. He's been in the Madness of King George. There's this
Oh wow.
scene where King George like kicks the harpsichord player off his seat and takes over the conducting of the orchestra, and that's my father that he kicks off the seat. Um, so
I have to say, I mean, Amadeus is one of my favorite movies,
yeah, man
Milos
too.
Forman. But I mean, like, what kind of a musician do you have to be that, like, you're the guy they choose to be Mozart? You know, like musically, um, chapeau, as they say.
Right. No,
Yeah.
yeah. And my father would definitely was I mean, I don't know how else you put it. My father was definitely like one of these kind of ultra gifted musicians. He was playing the church organ. He was playing the organ at his church by 13 years old. Um he just did that. That's
It would
and
take me 13 years just to figure out how all those pedals work.
he went he won every organ playing prize that there was at the Royal Academy of Music. He toured around the world, and what the crazy part is he also didn't really practice all that much. We always knew that there was a concert coming up because we would hear him furiously practicing, like, the day before. He was a terrible procrastinator, and I'm afraid to say that I see a lot of myself in him. But he even said that he felt like, if he didn't have music, that he might have just wanted to be like a comedian or something, because he was also very, very funny and very,
Okay.
very charming and charismatic. And some people say that too, but you
Yeah,
know
you're funny. I don't know about the other stuff, but you're
sure,
funny.
yeah. But yeah, so I felt a lot of pressure to kind of live up to what, and I didn't really have any other skills that I thought I could really do. So when I got to college, I was kind of I was told that was kind of where I had to go after high school, and I spent 2 years in school just getting through my general education requirements, and I was kind of told, like, you have to decide on something. Meanwhile, this is costing thousands of dollars a semester. And the original plan I had for college, I couldn't even do because I couldn't even afford it. Originally, I got accepted into Emerson College, and I thought about like going into like broadcasting, and I did like internships with like TV news stations, and I thought maybe at that point I kind of wanted to be like Stephen Colbert. I wanted to be like a funny guy on TV. But when I realized that wasn't really going to work, I had to do something, and the only thing I really had any kind of aptitude in at all was like music, voice, piano, that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of what I just sort of fell into. And I was sort of deciding whether I should like focus on piano or focus on voice. And I thought, well, voice is easier and I'm going to get out of here sooner. And so I did that. And I didn't really have a plan of what I was going to do. And eventually I thought, when I left school, I was thinking like, oh, well, maybe I could be like, maybe I could, be an orchestrator. I could like do movie scores. So I did a few like independent movie scores, and I felt like that maybe could like be a path forward. But that's a really competitive and ambitious life, and unless you're John Williams, it's not going to happen for you. So it's not going to be the chances of success are going to be pretty slim. And at the same time as I was doing all of this, I was like blogging about astrology with Chris, and I was just clutching at straws really for like what kind of my life could be about. And then when I graduated, I that's when I ended up meeting Beth, falling in love, becoming a dad very, very quickly. And I still didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And so like I was a music director at like a Catholic church for a couple of years, and like that was a total disaster because I do not belong anywhere near a Catholic church. But that just happened to be what I had like experience and training in, with the because
With
they
the
have very
organ.
kind of
Yeah.
specific music.
Yeah.
Because they have very like specific like music things you kind of need to know. They have a very specific format and stuff like that, and it just happened to fall within the kind of skills I'd sort of acquired at that time. So then I eventually went into teaching music, and uh that was a really big letdown because I thought that being good at music was what you needed to be a successful teacher. Turns out you'd need to be a good teacher to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I was able to be that, and I really had to adjust to the role of teacher, which is very, very different from being a good musician. um and that's something my father said as well, is that he really struggled with teaching because he didn't know how to tell someone how to do what he just seemingly came
Right.
out of the womb knowing
Yeah.
how to do, and made it hard.
Well, I think
So
George Bernard Shaw said, "Those who can't do, teach." And then Woody Allen said, "Those who can't teach, teach Jim."
okay, so then and kind of out of like desperation, reaching kind of a breaking point in my life, which just happened to be the Venus retrograde in Scorpio of 2018. That was when I was able to kind of like finally. That was also when Uranus was on my midheaven, when I was finally able to kind of make this break and kind of take a leap of faith and make my transition from part-time astrology to full-time astrology. And I haven't looked back, and life's been a lot better since then.
Yeah. You were
See, the
born for
problem
this,
is
my friend.
problem is my Saturn's in the 5th house. So the thing that has always been the most challenging for me is an area of life that is usually more fun for everyone else. Creative expression, doing things like with music. I think it's a 5th house type of activity. But for me, I had to do all the kind of hard work with that. I had to sublimate that and go through that whole feeling of feeling like I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as my dad. I can't live up to my dad's legacy of being a successful musician and thinking like, okay, well, now I can do music, I can show how good I am. Well, I was good at the music part, but I wasn't good at navigating the politics of a Catholic church very well.
Right.
And so I had like the crap job, and then I thought, okay, well, I'll teach kids. That's another way you can get paid doing music. Well, that is also a very Saturnian task, and it involves children, the 5th house. So it's Saturn in the 5th house is about having positions and roles of responsibility and experiencing limitations and shame and fear of surrounding creative projects, and like not feeling you're good enough and not feeling like you can express that life to sort of the fullest extent you can. And I don't think I've fully cracked that. Maybe my second Saturn return will have some sort of second wind with it or something, but I think the Saturn return was very much my realization and reckoning with kind of the limitations of like what I could really do with that, and deciding to focus on the thing. Ironically, the thing that was sort of the crazier option ended up being the much better option, like being an astrologer.
Yeah, go
So
figure, huh? Go figure.
so
Well,
sorry for hogging the mic, but in response to that person who said I didn't know, about I went to school for it, but I didn't know about Beethoven. My mind was kind of somewhere else. I
you,
was I had my feet in a few different worlds. I wasn't paying attention to my Beethoven lecture, but maybe I'll read a biography
there you go.
and get more up to speed.
Crushed Orchids asked an interesting question. Since we're talking about music, any particular configurations come to mind? I would say, like, the thing is, I mean, I've looked at so many musicians' charts, and you get every kind of chart under the sun. You might get some sense of what the individual brings to their music, but I can't look at a chart and say, oh, this is a musician. They'll have the sun and moon in any of the 12 signs. They'll have the ascendant in any of the 12 signs. They'll have every variety of relationship to Neptune or every variety of relationship to Uranus. It's really, there's no single signature where you can say, okay, these are the musicians' charts, and then everyone else's charts are over there. Astrology is never that, reductible or, reductive.
I think it's more interesting than just like having a musician aspect. It's more, not only more complicated, but more fascinating and actually more satisfying that people seem to make the music that their charts reflect. I mean, in a way, astrology is like music, sort of like what astrology sounds like. It's the I think that a person's chart might reflect the kind of music they make, or what function their music has sort of in the world. And you can sort of see this with the release of certain songs, that they'll kind of bear the signature that's sort of most relevant to that work. And you've had a bunch of examples like that, because you actually have the times of when certain songs were recorded.
Oh yeah.
For example, I love the chart of the recording of A Love Supreme.
Oh yeah. No, that's amazing.
I love that.
Should I put that up?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. Coltrane, John Coltrane knew astrology well. He read about it quite a bit. He had one piece called Fifth House. He had another piece called Equinox. His wife also was, an amazing jazz pianist who put out a lot of astrologically inspired music. But yeah, he's most famous for Love Supreme. Um, there's a lot of stuff in his story. I should bring up the whole band because it's whoops. Yeah, we're done with Chiron for now. So that's Coltrane. His birth certificate probably says 5 p.m. It could be 3 p.m. It's one of those things like where the 5 could be a 3, but it's probably 5. That's my feeling about it. Now, A Love Supreme, he recorded with 4 musicians specifically. First was the drummer Elvin Jones, who was practically like a co-partner in the band. And then 2 younger guys. He had McCoy Tyner and Jimmy Garrison. Okay, now what I find interesting about these 4 musicians, these are the 4 guys in the John Coltrane Quartet. Coltrane's got Venus at 15 Virgo. His drummer, Elvin Jones, has the Sun and Venus retrograde at Virgo conjunct Coltrane's Venus. And then Jimmy Garrison is a Pisces with like the Mercury retrograde here. He's the bass player. And then finally, what was I going to? Oh yeah, and Garrison's Venus is just coming out of retrograde in Aquarius. So Elvin Jones has Venus retrograde. Garrison is has Venus in the phase just coming out of the retrograde, as does McCoy Tyner, the pianist. This Venus is also just coming out of retrograde in Scorpio. So the 3 other guys are all Venus retrogrades, like in the phase, and Coltrane's Venus is here. And when the record is released, or recorded rather, I should say, in 1964, there we are. When it's made, we have Uranus, Mars, and Pluto conjunct Coltrane's Venus. You see that?
Wow.
And like I said, so if we go to like, Elvin Jones has those planets conjunct his Sun this retrograde. And even just the fact that Coltrane's a Libra, but the other 3 guys in the band are all mutable suns. You've got a Virgo, you've got a Pisces, and a Sagittarius. Right. So it's this was an amazing band.
Right.
Just absolute superhumans.
The drumming is so incredible on that album.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just listen through and just listen to the drums.
Yeah.
Sort of focus on that. And it's just amazing.
I got to tell you, he's my favorite drummer. And I tried, when he was alive, I emailed him back in like 2002, 2003. I emailed him. And then when he died, I emailed his wife, please tell me what time he was born. It's like one of those charts that just, and I'll never have it, but it was something I really, really wanted. Another interesting thing about his story is that McCoy Tyner, who's the youngest guy in the band, happened to be born the exact same day, December 11th, 1938, that John Coltrane's grandfather died. And this was important because when Coltrane was grieving the death of his grandfather, that's when he started practicing his saxophone. Like he had it and he would kind of toot on it a little bit, but like to sort of console himself, he really got serious about the instrument on this day when his grandfather died, which happens to be the same day that his future pianist and McCoy Tyner is also absolutely my favorite piano player ever. And he's born on that day. What a like amazing connection between these musicians.
That puts Venus then in the same degree range as the recording of A Love Supreme, and it's conjunct Neptune.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, because someone said and Venus Neptune conjunct to the recording, and that's what I thought was just so incredible, was the fact that the recording of The Love Supreme has Venus conjunct Neptune in the sign of Scorpio, this depth that this record goes to, this just incredible soundscape, and just this overwhelming sort of, I don't know, feeling of oneness with the universe or something. That's just
Yeah.
a crazy piece of music.
Yeah. Well, you know, in that beginning intro, he plays the melody in every single key, which is his
Yeah,
way of saying this is like it's
this is
everywhere.
it's
A
this
love
is
supreme is something it's
omni
omni.
musical.
You play it
Yeah,
in every
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, it's
Yeah. So yeah, that's yeah, it's so much
yeah,
of what he did, especially in that period during the Uranus Pluto conjunction on his Venus on Elvin Jones's chart. Like he really, after Love Supreme, he really got into some heavy duty music that was just miles. And no matter what Coltrane was doing, people were always like, "Oh, I wish he was doing what he was doing 3 years ago." But like when he had been doing what he was doing 3 years ago, people were like, "Oh, I wish he was doing what he was doing 3 years ago." Like it was always like, you know,
yeah.
like his audience was always sort of like catching up with him.
Hmm.
But A Love Supreme really like it connected
High
with people.
watermark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it connected with people in a big way.
Um. So this. Well, yeah. So we got into talking about this because we were talking about like the things in people's charts, what makes someone a musician. Sometimes it's just so literal. For example, you probably have the charts for this. So a Ringo Starr,
Yeah,
um,
I probably have the charts for
he
this wherever
so
we're
he
going.
re- so he recorded a little help from my friends.
Yeah, I,
Now I think the story surrounding the recording of this is that they they were doing this really long recording session that went into the early hours of the morning, and Ringo like wanted to go home, and the other bandmates were like, no, like stay here, let's record the vocals to this song, let's get this done. And so he doesn't really want to do it. He's kind of maybe self-conscious about it, and so they literally kind of stand around him at the microphone while he records with a little help from my friends, with a little help from his friends. But the actual trance at that moment is just pretty hilarious because you can see that Ringo has the ruler of the ascendant in the third house of brothers, uh, right? Of which I suppose the Beatles are kind of a band of
yeah,
brothers.
because he's an only child, so
Yeah,
you know the
and
only brothers he's got are John, Paul, and George.
so he records. Now, I don't think the time for this is exactly correct because it says 7 p.m. That probably maybe was the beginning of the session. I know that
That's
the
the
actual
beginning
recording
of
of
the session. It's the beginning
yeah
of the
the
session.
yeah I think so. The actual recording of when he sang was probably like 3 a.m. the next day or so, but it doesn't quite matter. You can see that Venus was making that conjunction to his Jupiter in the third house, so he recorded a little help from my friends with a little help from his friends while Venus is conjunct Jupiter in his third house of brothers as he's
Right.
getting assistance from his. And of course this is the song that he still performs as his kind of closing song at his
Oh, for sure.
act. It becomes kind of the song that he sort of is most popularly kind of associated with him. So that's why I think the answer to like what makes someone a musician astrologically is a question that forces you to sort of overlook in some ways the more interesting phenomenon of how musicians charts seem to work, that their transits end up kind of becoming like recorded. You can listen to that transits. You're listening to transits when you're listening to music in a weird way.
Mm. What do you see
um
when you turn out the lights? I can't tell you, but I know it's mine.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's quite that's yeah, that whole sort of phenomenon is fascinating. I think I
Yeah.
remember um the song from the Rolling Stones, "I Don't Get No Satisfaction." Wasn't that
Yep.
released at a Mars Uranus conjunction?
It was. And it's another one of these great stories. Because it was recorded not long after it was written, but it's also in the middle of it's got so many layers to it. The story. So here's Keith Richards. And okay, so we'll go down to 1965. Funny enough, it's in Clearwater, Florida, future home of the Scientology. Um, so Keith wakes up in his hotel room in Clearwater, Florida, in the middle of the night, and he has this riff in his head, and he grabs his guitar, he turns on his tape recorder, he records the riff, and then he goes back to bed. And he wakes up and he hears it again, and he I think he even comes up with the title "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." He plays it for Mick, and Mick writes the lyrics. And Keith has a natal Mars-Uranus conjunction here in Gemini in the 8th, and the song comes to him in a dream, and with Neptune on his ascendant, no less. And then it's a recurrence of the Mars-Uranus conjunction on his midheaven, square the natal conjunction.
And sorry, what was the name of the song again?
I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Yeah,
if you were to describe this song, what would it be like?
it's about male frustration, right? It's about a guy who's just like can't be satisfied.
Right. It's Mars Uranus. Yeah.
Yeah. There's but it's very like sort of male,
yeah.
Trying to,
just, now.
Yeah.
I can't get no.
And it's a distorted guitar riff.
Right.
It's the beginning of that sort of, well, I Feel Fine by the Beatles was recorded a couple of months earlier, and they say that's got the first sort of feedback on it. But Satisfaction's got this very sort of deliberate, distortion to the guitar that's so distinctive, and
right.
And it really, it really sort of signifies the vibe of the song beautifully. And if I'm not mistaken, Brian Jones, the other guitar player in the band, did he not also have Mars Uranus? I'm trying to remember now. It's been so long since I looked. Yes, he does. Brian Jones. This is the thing. Brian Jones also had a Mars Uranus conjunction. So both guitar players did in the Rolling Stones. And what happens? It's so funny. Like, well, what the story I'm about to tell isn't funny. It's kind of gross, but it really sort of, in its own way, manifests in the song that Keith writes, because the same night in Clearwater, Florida, we get this from Bill Wyman, the bassist, published his diary. So we know it's the same night, May 7th, 1965, the same night that Keith wakes up and writes this riff. Brian Jones brings a groupie to his room. And when she comes out of the room the next morning, she's got like a black eye or bruises or something like that. And the Stones are like, holy, fuck, this guy beat this woman. And they wind up sort of beating him and ostracizing him. They're sort of mortified. I mean, the Rolling Stones are not like angels, but, they're not into this hitting women thing. And so he's got the Mars Uranus. He's having the recurrence.
Wow.
And so the song kind of signifies this, irrational rage, whatever motivated him to do this. The Mars-Uranus transit is also opposite his sun, but it's a recurrence for him. And also the thing about Satisfaction for Brian Jones, because Brian Jones actually started the band, and Mick and Keith sort of gradually took it over, especially because they were the songwriting team. And Brian Jones had really wanted it to stay as a blues band, and Satisfaction is really them moving into this new form. So it's sort of like the band is slipping through his fingers, and he's frustrated. He can't get any satisfaction.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was showing the chart that whole time. Here,
I was following.
Okay, well, maybe other people were.
Yeah,
probably, here, I'm sorry. I thought I was showing. Here, Brian Jones has the natal Mars-Uranus conjunction, and here's the transit for that same night that Keith woke up with the riff in his head, and it's opposite his sun, like I was saying. Sorry about that. I thought I was sharing the screen still. But you can see it's a recurrence for both guys in the band, and while for Keith, it manifests in him writing one of the greatest guitar riffs in rock and roll history. And then for Brian, it's this very sadder thing, that, I mean, at this point, he's only got 4 years left to live. He's going to gradually sort of deteriorate as the band slips from his fingers. He'll be fired from the band a month before he dies in his swimming pool. So, yeah, I know it's a sort of sad and kind of horrifying story.
Sure, yeah, but it's still an amazing bit of astrology. trying to remember another sort of example of how a song sort of shows up really literally. I mean, honestly, if you just look at the release date of a song, typically there'll be some kind of
Yeah.
signature there that kind of tells you. I always thought it was funny that, like, for example, Katy Perry released that song, "I Kissed a Girl," and I liked it at that Venus retrograde in
Right.
2007, and
Right.
that was the same summer that Rihanna released that song "Umbrella," which kind of put her on the map, and so it was a kind of a strange that Venus retrograde of 2007 put a few different
That's
pop stars
always
on the map.
that Venus retrograde, what I call the red 5 in
Yeah,
retrograde, that the one that's coming up this summer, the one that
yeah.
happens in Leo, that also used to be in Virgo. Talk about music history. Here we go again. Sorry, I keep going to the sharing the screen, but
Yeah,
this
no,
needs
no,
to
that's what you're
this
here for, Nick. You haven't taken the glasses off, so we're not out of the woods.
that's when you know I'm really on fire. The glasses haven't even come off. So first, I'm going to go all the way back to 1927. Oh, I should be in the right file to do that. There we are. 1927. Oh yeah, there's Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht, of course, but that's not what I'm looking for. There's also Louis Armstrong, but that's not what I'm looking for. What am I looking for? I am looking for. Come on, guys, where is it? There we are. Bristol, Tennessee. Okay, now what happens is this week in early August of 1927, this is Tennessee where it meets the border of Virginia. There's recording music is only just coming out. You've got, radio and what have you. People are only just starting to make records. So there's sort of a call made out. The Ralph Peer of the Victor Talking Machine Company puts word out that he's going to record music from people who are, around in the neighborhood. And among the people who come in are the Carter family, Maybelle Carter and AP Carter, Sarah Carter. These are the first sort of country bluegrass music being recorded, like everything that follows. Of course, their daughter is going to marry Johnny Cash later and all that, but there's a number of recording artists that are recorded in this period, in this week of 1927, as Venus is just going to go retrograde in Virgo. You can see it's 18 days from the station, but in terms of how I use the cycles, I include that in the red 5 interval. So you have the birth of country bluegrass music, which is, it's being, excuse me, sort of recorded and instantly sort of refined as a commercial product right off the get-go. So you get that. That's the first sort of red 5 I can point to. Then when you get, I'm not going to cover it all. There's a much longer version of this talk, but I'll just go to some of the highlights. Then if you go to the red 5 of 1959, you get the release of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue album, which, as I suggest, it was recorded a little bit earlier, but it comes out at this time. And this album is the first jazz album to use modal forms of composition. It's breaking away from the 12-bar blues changes. It's doing the same thing to jazz that'll later happen to rock and roll when you get metal, when it's like not just a sort of form of blues music anymore, but becomes sort of more stripped down and simplified.
Oh, well, actually, that's interesting because if Neptune and Leo kind of laid down the groundwork, which Uranus later tills, in a revolutionary form, then I guess Uranus and Leo isn't just rock and roll, but also like experimental jazz versus the sort of earlier Neptune and Leo jazz.
Yeah, although I mean, this album is, experimental maybe for a hot minute, but it from the day it's released until the present day, it's the best-selling jazz album in the history of the genre.
True. Yeah.
It's and there's a lot. It's the kind of album where even people who don't like jazz like Kind of Blue.
Right.
Yeah. It's immensely attractive. Like even people who don't really like jazz like this record. It's a really lovable album. But you can see it's coming out in this Venus retrograde, and it really does revolutionize jazz.
Right.
My favorite quote.
I tend to
Miles
think of
Davis.
Birth of the Cool more than
Yeah, but Birth of the Cool was a lot. I mean, that's sort of almost like classical music. That was the Uranus ingress into Cancer about a decade earlier.
wow, is that much earlier?
Oh yeah, yeah. He was quite young when he did that. Kind of blue. My favorite thing about
Huh.
there's a great quote from Miles when he learns about modal jazz. From George Russell, this composer, teaches him at a dinner party about modal jazz and what you can do and how it'll open up music for a soloist, because you don't have to follow blues changes. You can be it opens up because the background is more simple. You don't have to
Right.
be thinking around the backing. And my favorite quote, Charlie Parker, who Miles Davis used to play with when he was like 18. Charlie Parker had died in 1955, but Miles Davis says to George Russell, he says, "George, if Bird was alive and he heard about this, it would kill him." Which is just,
Yeah.
hilarious. So there's that red 5. Okay, now the next one, and yes, I'm still giving you the short version of this. The next red 5 is the summer of 1967. This is when, of course, Sergeant Pepper is released, right? Just a little bit before the retrograde, but it's the
David Bowie comes on
well,
the
yeah,
scene?
his first album, although this doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
He's a couple of years away from being anybody. But there's also the rise of Jimi Hendrix. He plays the Monterey Pop Festival as Venus is moving towards its retrograde, and then you get the literal the summer of love. All the stuff that's going on.
Right.
Whether it's Zappa, All You Need Is Love. Give me a break.
Right.
That was a international broadcast. The Stones were being busted for drugs. They were on trial, but it's the summer of love.
So these Venus retrogrades, then, because the main reason I brought up like the Katy Perry example is just because it's sort of the more typical, I guess, idea of Venus retrograde being a planet which maybe like sort of pushes social boundaries, social norms. You sort of get people behaving naughtily, I guess you could say. But through your examples here, we're kind of seeing that maybe there's this broader theme to Venus retrogrades, which is that they are pushing art forms forward in new directions.
Yeah, very much, very much.
Yeah. And of course, Venus is the planet that most astrologers would tend to associate with the arts and the musical arts. I think Mercury, though, has a role there to play as well. Because music is combinations of skills. It's not just chords of Venus; it's also rhythms. It's
Sure.
and that's more mercurial.
Well,
the skills of music.
I still have more to go.
Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead. Yeah.
I don't have a chart for it, but it's right in this period of August of 75 at the next red 5, the next Venus retrograde, that there's an article written. I forget which magazine, not necessarily Rolling Stone, but one of the big rock magazines covers the fact that all these new upcoming bands are performing at this dive bar on the Bowery called CBGB's. And these bands have strange names like the Ramones and Blondie, and Patti Smith Group and Talking Heads. And all of these bands sort of like immediately get caught into this, zeitgeist thing. And they're all about to, get record deals and release their albums. But there's that sort of that sense that there's a movement happening, right? And then finally, my voice is starting to go on me, but I have to take us back to one more red 5, and that is 1991.
Oh, Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's
everything. It is the release of Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden. And yes, as you mentioned, it's Nirvana's Nevermind album. It's Pearl Jam's.
Oh my gosh, Miles Davis died.
Yeah, Miles Davis died. John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, the 3 main horns on Kind of Blue, all died during Red 5s. I didn't even mention that.
Oh no! Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. That's like a side note. Okay, the three horn players on Kind of Blue, which was released in a red 5,
In
they
a
all
red
died in red
5.
5. Coltrane died
Wow.
in July of 67. Cannonball Adderley died in August of 75, and Miles died in September of 91. Yeah,
That's wild.
yeah. But yeah, just it's Blood Sugar Sex Magic, it's Pearl Jam's 10, it's the Metallica Black Album. They all come out this summer during this other sort of red 5 Venus transit. So in
Wow.
other words, yeah, whether it's country bluegrass, whether it's the sort of the 60s Summer of Love and Hendrix, or whether it's the CBGB's punk of 75, or the advent of the grunge revolution of 91, it's always in this red 5 Venus
Or
retrograde
the
phase.
pop dilettantes of the summer of 2007. It's
Exactly. There you go.
it's all of those folks. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So if you're a musician and you're trying to put out a record that's really cutting edge, this summer is a great time to do it and put yourself on the map and get a legacy going and all that, because it's expect it. I tend to expect that with the red 5. The red 5 of 1999 wasn't necessarily so big for music, but it was huge for cinema. It
Yeah.
was
Big
like
movies from that time.
the
Yeah.
American Beauty, Fight Club, Being John Malkovich, all that stuff of 99. So there does tend to be somewhere this sort of cultural explosion during the red 5 Venus retrograde.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's going to be really interesting to see. For sure. So Nick, being aware of this, did you take any of this into account when you released any of your albums?
No, the only time I was in a band that released a CD, it was just before I became an astrologer. In fact, it was because I I was so depressed at how crummy the album was that I kind of had a mini sort of breakdown, and astrology kind of rescued me from it.
Wow.
Crushed Orchids is asking about red 5. Crushed Orchids, on my YouTube channel, I have a video called Introduction to the Venus Synodic Cycle. It's 11, 12, or 12 minutes long, and it'll explain to you what I mean by a red 5. But the long story short, maybe I'll just quickly show an image.
Basically, it's in the period just before Venus is about to go retrograde, and while it's retrograde in the sign of Virgo or Leo, depending on the period of history you're looking at.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
the way I measure the retrograde is from greatest western elongation to greatest eastern elongation. So in that sense, it's here we go. Am I sharing my screen? No, I'm not. I'll share my screen quickly so I can just show you what it looks like. This whole circle represents 8 years, 8 years minus 2 days, which is the length of a Venus synodic cycle. And I can break it into a division of, I can break it into a division of 10 or 20. The 10 is breaking it down by phase. Venus is morning star, Venus is evening star. And then the conjunctions happen in the middle of the blue phases, in the middle of blue intervals, in the middle of the red intervals. The red intervals are where the retrogrades happen. The blue intervals are where the exterior conjunctions happen. So if you think of the red interval, it begins with the greatest western elongation, and then it gradually catches up to a conjunction with the sun here. And then, by retrograde, and then keeps going while the sun goes forward, and eventually reaches its, it stations direct, starts moving forward and reaches its greatest eastern elongation before it becomes a full-on sort of morning star heading towards its next exterior conjunction. So the red 5 is where we get the Venus retrogrades that are currently in Leo. Like right now, as we speak, we're in a black 1 interval, and we're about to go into a red 5. Last October, when we had the Sun-Venus conjunction in Libra, that was the blue 2, when we went from a rising C to a setting A. So the red 1 is Venus retrograde in Aries, going to Pisces. The red 2 interval is Venus retrograde in Scorpio. The red 3 interval is Venus retrograde in Gemini. And the red 4 is Venus retrograde in Capricorn. And like I said, the red 5 is Venus retrograde in Leo. There's a whole pattern to it. But yeah,
someone asked if each one has a sort of archetype, and the answer is yes, kind of.
Sort of. Well, I can't say. I mean, that's a developing concept. Coldplay are playing around the corner from where you live. Oh, try living somewhere else. Ha! No, okay.
I like
I never meant to cause you
some
trouble.
of
I
the
never meant to cause
first.
you. Yeah,
Like
I'm
maybe
just
like
being
some of the earlier songs are pretty good, I think.
I'm just being a jerk. I hope they're pleasing you. Vinny doesn't seem to mind. All right. What was I saying? Yeah, this scheme that I developed for the Venus synodic cycle, it just helps us, talk about certain periods of time. These intervals only occur once every 8 years. It's 146 days long, once every 8 years. So it's a fairly small increment in time. So the fact that I could go from the Venus retrograde of 27 to 59 to 67 to 75 to 91, this is this recurring 8-year repetition that goes on with Venus ad infinitum. So this is just our sort of shorthand, so we know. If you watch the video, like I said on my YouTube channel, it'll make a lot of sense.
Don't worry, I'm still getting my head around it. I really need to I have to check my reference to make sure I actually am talking about the right one. I haven't developed the same level of shorthand yet that Nick has, but I will get there.
Yeah, you will get there. You basically get it. Bliss to be is asking if they're John Lennon because they're also a white two-face. Yes, you are John
You are
Lennon.
John Lennon.
You are John Lennon. You're also Bruce Lee and Richard Pryor and Terry Gilliam and all kinds of wonderful white twos. But it's a white two interval rising B phase. I invented this language, damn it, but even I sometimes screw it up. So there's intervals and phases. Intervals are the 20 division with the 4 colors, and then the phases are just the white and black, either evening star, morning star. When I first designed the system, I tried to sort of combine them into one, but then I realized, no, I need the 2 measurements of the 2 different things, and then to combine them in that sort of double wheel the way I did.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
how you doing, Nick?
Yeah, my voice is going. How you doing? Have we reached it, or do you have anything?
I mean, I'm probably about at my level. There are a few other things that need to get done today, but I think this is really good. Okay. As always, thoroughly entertained and educated by you, Nick.
Oh, this is good fun. Well, likewise, of course, Patrick.
Oh. Well,
I hope I haven't done all the talking. I'm not even aware.
I've been accused of being hog before, so I try to consciously let you go and do your thing, and you did a great job.
Well, this is what you get for doing a live stream with someone with Mercury and Leo. There'll be a bit of a mic hogging, but all right.
No worries.
Okay, I guess it's the way the vibe is. Sometimes you'll talk more. Sometimes I'll talk more.
Yeah, you had a lot to say, and it was all really good. So yeah, I don't think you're in error at all.
This has definitely been the most fun we've had so far. Wouldn't you say this is the best one we've done so far?
It's nice that some of the streaming stuff is now out of the way. Now we can kind of just get to this kind of exchange. So.
Someone did mention earlier they'd love to do more on sort of the synastry with bands within groups and stuff, which is I've got loads of that. You got the
files, yeah.
Yeah, I got loads of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we'd be happy to talk about some of that. We both love music and love talking about music and astrology. As you can tell, I mean, we love all the arts and looking at the astrology behind the arts.
Yeah, someone said, I wonder if Neptune and Aries will be more aggressive and martial music then.
Well, last time Neptune ingressed into Aries, it was literally the day the American Civil War started. So, that was a big bang.
You had the first photography being taken of war zones and war scenes.
Yeah, but I think there were photographs taken of the Crimean War, which was a few years earlier, I think. I mean, it's the American one, obviously, I mean, it really was an explosion of photography, certainly on the battlefield. But I'm pretty sure there were photos taken at the Crimean War, which is sort of like the European adjunct to the American Civil War in a way.
Trying to remind myself of what's going on in that time frame.
What, from 1861 to whatever?
Yeah, so it was because I guess you had Well, because I think of like martial music, and I think of like Wagner, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't he? But he would have been composing in that time frame.
Yeah, he was
Um,
composing, during, let's see here. I do have a Wagner file. Is a Wagner file? On Sprockets, we show a
Now,
Wagner
yeah,
files.
so yeah, he did the Ring Cycle operas that in 1851 to 1882. So yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty martial. Kill the
yeah.
rabbit, kill the rabbit.
um, yeah, everyone has to know Looney Tunes to get that. But the thing that I've really been thinking of with the Neptune and Aries thing, and this could probably go on for a whole other, hour or so on this, but basically, I think one of the things that we've seen with Neptune and Pisces has been just this. I mean, it's encapsulated like on a media level. Neptune and Pisces has been the streaming binge we've kind of all been on, right?
Yep.
Uh this is when we've consumed entire series in their entirety in a single sitting. In some ways it's been a golden era for television and streaming.
Yep.
And on the kind of Hollywood level, Neptune and Pisces coincided with the development and filming of all these like legacy sequels and these nostalgia driven
Right.
Piscean sentiment, that's sort of driven projects like the Star Wars sequels
Blade Runner.
um and yeah and
And that.
Stranger Things being this kind of homage to
Yeah.
films from the Neptune and Sag period, and
And
Neptune and
even
Sag
even
was
the
also
even
Star
the bat
Wars.
even the Batman being sort of a shout out to the earlier Batman kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and then we've also had these kind of like multiverse crossing projects, with Marvel, and really, this Jupiter Neptune thing with Marvel has just been, a really amazing, um, sort of high point for this sort of art form. But that I feel like this is all going to come to an absolute screeching halt because when Neptune enters Aries, it's not just Neptune entering Aries, right? It's also going to be in conjunction with Saturn in 2025. And it just shows such a conclusive and decisive ending to this whole Neptune and Pisces era of, sentiment driven, nostalgia driven fantasy projects that I think will be moving into an era that lifts up the auteur director again, that
Mm,
moves away from this kind of Marvel Disney Neptune and Pisces complex towards more independent movie
right.
making and sort of a return to the idea of like the singular director or the singular vision being the thing that leads things forward. I also think there'll probably be more interactive and audience driven
Mm,
narratives. So spoilers, for example, are a huge problem for Hollywood. And if you had these sort of interactive Neptunian experiences where people are able to kind of guide the narrative through their own, instead of there being a Star Wars movie, you kind of are like the protagonist of your own, interactive VR Star Wars adventure where the movie is just whatever you kind of decide. I think
right.
it'll be more like individualized sort of content, and it will be
Right. Like
eh,
you get to be
yeah,
Spider-Man.
but
Yeah.
because it's Aries, right, which is exalts the sun,
Yeah.
so it's going to
Yeah.
be exalting sort of the idea of the individual or like auteur directors. So that's kind of my opinion of what types of things we might see with Neptune and Aries. It'll be this like absolutely decisive shift away from this current media landscape of Netflix and streaming and
Yeah.
the whole Disney Marvel thing.
And
Um,
you're absolutely right. As you saw, Wagner, his whole sort of oeuvre is Neptune in Aries. And I'm also reminded, like going back to the U.S. Civil War, the fact that the Civil War broke out. Then think of the theme songs. John Brown's Body. It's all about like heroism. The music is. I mean, Wagner is all about heroism and mythology, but so are those Civil War songs. That mourn heroic soldiers and mourn John Brown, his martyrdom and that kind of thing. This is all very Neptune and Aries, I
there's
think.
that joke by, I know it's canceled, but there's that joke by Woody Allen when he's listening to Wagner. I forget, there's like in a movie of his or something. He's listening to Wagner and he's going like, "Wow, I just really want to invade Poland." This music makes me want to invade Poland. But actually, and side note, which is maybe more of a major note, I don't know. But obviously Wagner was like a terrible anti-Semite,
Yeah.
and his music was kind of used as like basically the soundtrack to the rise of Nazi Germany,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
because
Woody Allen has another funny gag about that in one of his movies. Like some other person, he's recounting to a friend that someone was saying, "Oh, I like Wagner," and he's taking it as a sort of dog whistle that the person's anti-Semitic. But yeah, absolutely.
So I think the fact that Uranus was in Aries in the 30s, as his music kind of took on this new purpose, of bolstering this anti-Semitic regime and movement. And then when Uranus came back to Aries 84 years later, and we had the rise of the red pilled nonsense, and Trump running for president, this kind of renewal of this kind of idea of like the unleashed masculine force, in this kind of terrifying way. That's another thing that kind of leads me to think like Neptune in Aries could be really bad in some ways, because it will like mainstream that whole sort of Aries type idea that was in, because with Uranus and Aries, we kind of had the rise of two different kinds of awakenings, right? We had the rise of the red pills at the same time that we kind of saw that sort of counterbalance with becoming woke, right? We had like being woke or being red pilled, these two sort of alternate versions of awakenings. And so Neptune coming back through those same degrees that Uranus was in when we had that kind of awakening would sort of mainstream in some ways those ideas, and that could be good, that could also be really bad, obviously depending on your perspective on
yeah, it
on
depends
that.
who
And
you
given
are.
it depends on who you are. If you're someone who really believes in all that that kind of Aries vibe, then maybe that's a good time. Although Saturn, though, would seem to kind of potentially be a critical angle on that development as well. So
that'll make it a very different ingress into Aries than
any
you would
we've
otherwise
had.
have. Yeah, than
Yeah.
you would otherwise have. All right. Well, I'm
Proud to
spent.
be an American. At least
America!
free.
Fuck yeah!
That's a Saturn Pluto song, if I've ever heard one. That was like that was one of those that like post 9/11 Saturn Pluto, country
freedom
anyway.
ain't free.
Yeah,
it's a hefty fucking fee.
to America. Yeah. Oh my god. Anyway, yeah, we're probably gonna go. But if there's anything else you want to say about Neptune Aries before we go.
No. I saw when we were talking about it, I put up some charts from Wagner's.
Did you want to continue? I saw you put that away. You want to?
No. I mean, I was just confirming what you said, just sort of illustrating it visually. No, I think holy moly, we've covered a lot. We've gone all over the place. This is also what I was hoping, like, because we don't have like a set theme or format, that we just sit down and talk, and that anything can come up, and we're not. We're not trying to, we just sort of let the horse out of the stable and see where it runs. And today I think was a great example of it working that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone said no more reboots. No IPs, please.
What's
like, no, I guess, or new IPs, like new intellectual properties. I think that's in reference to my comments about how Saturn, Neptune, and ingressing into Aries would be like a decisive end to this like endless remake era that we seem to be in now, and that it really will be like new stuff. Because I think if there's anything else you can say about Aries, it's that it, because it's a cardinal sign, it introduces new things. There'll be new things in the zeitgeist. We'll have things beyond Spider-Man and Captain America and Iron Man,
or we might still have Spider-Man, Captain America, and Iron Man, except instead of it being some huge studio, it's a movie you can make on your laptop, because AI allows you, like you can make them. We started off with this whole.
You can upload a comic book and just say, make a movie of this.
Yeah. I mean, AI. Someone said AI is sort of being overblown, but we're not far from when someone could actually, like, with the the right vision and skill with the technology, could make something that comes pretty close to a Marvel movie, just on their laptop with no actors, no,
Well, this is
just
this is one of the reasons why the writer's strike is.
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
another one of those. I mean, it's sort of an existential fear, but not even really that existential. It's just sort of genuine fear that they'll be replaced by.
I just read an article this morning that reminded me that part of the reason Trump had his big rise was that the writers' strike of '07 allowed the celebrity. It happened just like it was when he had his
Oh,
regular apprentice show. He did 6 seasons of it, and it was sinking. It was going to be canceled, and then the writers' strike happened, and he did his first Celebrity Apprentice right, in the middle of that strike. And of course, with no other TV going on, that's how the show got so big. And so like that writer's strike is this missing piece of political history that, like, when you put it in there in the puzzle, you're like, oh, because otherwise, like,
and
what
that
the hell was
direct station occurred in Gemini, didn't it?
Yep,
By
that's right.
probably not too far off from his son. God damn it. I did not put that together. And that is genuinely.
Yeah. That's a big
God.
deal. That's a big deal.
Wow. So who
yeah.
knows then what else could, like, if so we
Exactly.
don't pay writers, like
we
we
don't
will
pay
not
writers, we get Trump for
we're gonna
president.
get we're gonna get like some asshole like
it's really
filling
not
the
that
time
outrageous a
with
statement.
bullshit. Yeah.
I thought the biggest tragedy of it was we lost the show Heroes, and
Right.
until I read this thing this morning, that was my opinion. But now I have to, okay, that was the second worst.
Pay the writers, or else we're gonna deal with like a fascist dictatorship.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's worrying.
Yes, it is. I've been researching Trump quite a bit lately. I just sat through like a few of the 2015 debates, and just making a lot of charts, and yeah, I'm finding some interesting stuff. When the whole thing was going on, as is my wont, I don't usually want to pay attention while the thing's happening. I like to study things as a historian, not as someone who's responding to the evening's news. But yeah, I'm finding some really interesting astrology there. No matter how terrible the person, the astrology is always fascinating.
Well, and with Trump, it's really very.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, he just has such a clear connection to certain transits that just really, show the phenomenon at work. I wish I had been able to understand his chart better in 2016.
Yeah, there you go. Well, the price of an education.
Wasn't really looking at. Yeah, I mean, it was. I also kind of over relied, on the sort of on my conventional understanding of like zodiacal releasing. I wasn't even really taking other things into account. But even when you do take things into account, like, for example, the recurrence of his Venus-Saturn conjunction in the 12th house, and the fact that there was a Venus-Saturn conjunction coming up at the time of the election, kind of,
and it did manifest, but it just didn't. It didn't it was always this thing like, oh, this will be the thing that gets him. Like, you remember the whole grab him by the pussy thing, and everyone's like, oh, this guy's toast. This guy's totally toast. Like, no,
no. I think there's been a lot of discourse on that, and what is the best way to sort of counter someone like Trump, and there's so many of the sort of conventional, I mean, any number of the different controversies that have been involved with would have ended the career of any other politician long ago. I mean, for me, it was like over even, I mean, I never thought of him as more than just a D-list celebrity, at the time he ran. I was just like, okay. But I think Trump's weakness is that he tires himself out. He has to no one else can do it for him. He just has to finally give up, kind of. He has to go too far himself. He's the only one who can be his own worst enemy, but anyone else is kind of.
I'll say this. I also, like, in 2016, I think it wasn't even an astrological thing. I think I just couldn't,
True.
But the main thing was I saw his chart, and I was like, well, this is the main thing that really threw me off astrologically, was I saw his chart and I'm like, well, this guy's supposed to be 2024. He's not supposed to be 2016.
You were like, he's too early.
it's too early. He's supposed to be 2024. And I just like, no, that's not, and of course, if I just thought a little harder, there's only ever been one other president who served non-consecutive terms, Cleveland.
Right.
And if that sort of possibility had ever just occurred to me, I could have arrived there. But look, there was so much between 2016 and
Right.
2021 that, that we'd never seen before as
Right.
it is. So it was hard to imagine. But yeah, I always thought when I saw his chart, I was like, well, this guy, 2024 is his year, not 2016. And I think that's ultimately true, unfortunately.
Now, do you now this could spiral off into another big discussion, but I'm a little confused though that you'd say 2024 because Uranus isn't in Gemini yet. Are you
No,
just
it
talking about
goes
the fact that it's going into Gemini
it,
if he were
in
president at the
in
time?
2025 as the yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, so the election isn't Uranus and Gemini, but shortly after that first inauguration, it'll be a Uranus and Gemini presidency.
Because wouldn't 2028 then make a little more sense because that would be like Uranus actually being in the sign of Gemini. Why would he have to be president or to like at the
The
time
the ingress is
of the
powerful. Like
ingress?
so for
I
him to
don't
yeah,
deny that, but does he
yeah.
have to be president for that to still be important? Because
Well,
the other
look, I hope not.
yeah, I know.
I'm not.
I'm just trying to get behind why
I,
you're because I understand what you've said about like Uranus and Gemini and Trump, but I was
yeah,
just curious about like what like is it the fact that Uranus is going to be conjunct his midheaven in 2024 and close to like the
I think
Jupiter
no, I
Uranus
think
conjunction?
Uranus spends 7 years in a sign, and it's
Mhm.
going there in 2025. And look, I don't know how long the asshole's going to live, but I think
Probably past the conjunction, I think.
yeah, I think if he gets elected in 2024, I know he's not technically not supposed to serve like another term after that, but look at who we're dealing with. None of the forget what the laws are or what I mean, he's under indictment, and we're still like talking about him winning the election. So
Yeah.
all bets are off as far as that goes. No, I just look, I think um, sure, the Uranus goes into Gemini in 2025 within a couple of months of the inauguration, but it's going to be a Uranus and Gemini presidency. And yeah, his chart just screams America to me,
I would think that the person who becomes president in
Uh,
2024 is going to be a real
I,
it's going to be the
geocosmic Valentine. I hope you're right. I'm just going by the astrology. I'm
yeah.
just going, I mean, like, I hope you're right. This is not wishful speaking. I'm
Right,
sorry,
because
Patrick.
oh,
I
no.
interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I was
But
just
every time I say this, there's always someone who's like, "What are you talking about? He's sick. He's gonna die. He's under indictment." I'm like, "Yeah, I hope so. I hope he dies right now." But no,
I wonder what would cause the greater reaction because because back when Uranus entered Gemini in the 1860s,
yeah,
wasn't that like the some people disagreed with Abraham Lincoln becoming president,
yes,
right?
and no, this is a good point.
That was the inciting
Because
cause.
who was the Gemini who had Uranus conjunct his sun in the 1860s?
Davis.
Jefferson
Jefferson
Davis.
Davis.
Yeah. So like, okay, yeah, maybe Trump doesn't win the election, but because of it, like the South secedes and he's the head of this new Confederacy. Yeah, maybe it's that.
Well,
uh,
because all right, because what if there was another scenario where, say, like Kamala Harris ends up having to supplant Biden, and she ends up being at the top of the ticket, and she wins, and like her victory would be the thing that causes this sort of giant conservative backlash, a la Obama in 2008, or rather 2009, where you had the rise of the Tea Party and everything with the Venus retrograde in Aries, which we have again.
yeah.
In 2025 in the spring, and that would be occurring in the same time as the Uranus and Gemini. Like I feel like the thing that would cause such that Uranus and Gemini ingress to be so big is if the person who became president was just someone that the people could not handle. And I can't tell whether that would be Kamala Harris for the right to have like a black woman president,
I don't.
or if it's Trump and that causes the left to just
Yeah. I
out of the
don't.
country.
I don't. My impression right now is that neither Biden or Harris are on the Democratic ticket, but my impression is also that Trump is. I mean, on the Republican ticket, not on the
Right.
Democratic ticket. That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
I do actually think at some point, what if he does get elected, Trump is going to do some kind of pivot on the right wingers in some way.
Okay, people.
He's always
Okay.
he's
Okay.
he's
Abortion's
always
legal. Okay. All right.
he's always I mean, anyone who gets in his orbit winds up getting burned. That's the other thing. But anyway, that's a topic for
I
another
mean, he's a
show.
terrible leader. Really. Just, I mean, the stories of just how chaotic and disorganized things were. I mean,
No, I know.
yeah, it just, yeah,
None of what
you
I'm
can't do it.
saying is
Yeah,
none of what I'm
yeah, yeah,
saying
yeah.
is a
I
defense
know,
or
I
an
know.
endorsement or
Mhm.
anything. I'm just saying the guy's
Right.
chart looks like America to
You
me.
know, to be clear, yeah, and I absolutely agree with that.
That-
To be clear, I also am not terribly confident about Biden being the eventual person. And people are going to go, okay, well, why? Well, I outlined this in my video, and I guess I'm giving this to you guys for free because I just charge like 15
well,
bucks for this video, but
if
it's
they've
okay. I
sat
don't
through
mind.
2.5 hours of this video,
Yeah, if
then
you sat through, you deserve it.
Yeah.
Basically, the one of the big reasons why I anticipate that if Biden runs in the general election and he is the candidate that goes up against the GOP challenger, he loses, or he just isn't the person on the ticket, is because uh, when you look at major transits by Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in Pisces to the degree of his IC, you'll see that it corresponds with times where his uh, uh his place of residence changes. Now, this doesn't seem like a very important clue, except that you have to remember that presidents do move into a particular address. Now, I'm not saying this is an approach you could apply to every presidential election, but it seems to be something that works in Biden's chart. When Saturn went through Pisces in the mid 60s, that was when he left Scranton, he left his parents, and he moved into this really tiny, cramped apartment with his girlfriend at the time. And when Saturn came to Pisces again in the mid 90s, it was when he sold his house and he bought this land, and he was essentially homeless for a while he was getting the house built on the land that he had bought. So he
Right.
was without a house.
Right. I mean,
Right?
he was a U.S. senator at the time, but
At
he
the
was,
time, yeah, I'm not saying he was homeless on the streets. Yeah, he was.
yeah.
He had a place to stay, but he was without his home, basically without his home base. So he loses his parents during the 60s. He
He
loses
was
his
living out of his
land
Mustang. He was living
in
out
the
of his
mid
Mustang.
90s. Yeah, yeah. And then we get to Saturn and Pisces, where Saturn's going to cross his IC degree again in 2024, and then make another conjunction to it
Yeah.
in early 2025, and we see the loss of his house. Now, if that were just it, that's just one factor. But then we have to look at like what happened when Uranus crossed that same degree. Uranus crossed that same degree of Pisces, his IC in Pisces, when he moved into the vice presidential quarters, because that was right after he won the election in 2008 as vice president. So his residence changed. Neptune reached that same degree in early 2021 when he moved into the White House.
Yeah.
So we can see like the revolutionary nature of these things, right? I mean, he moves into like the house he's been dreaming of moving into.
That he's been trying and trying and trying to move into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, with Uranus, he came close, right? He got into like the vice president's quarters, and then Neptune came to that same degree area,
And he
and
got
he
in.
actually achieves the real thing that he'd been trying to get since like the 80s. And so we have this unfortunate return of Saturn through that same degree area, and I think it's the loss of his house, which would only make sense if
He loses the
he
election
loses
or
or
doesn't even run.
or
Yeah.
he serves out his term,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. Um
Beautiful
so
astrology. And I think that's absolutely spot on. Well done.
um
I agree.
the Jupiter transits through Pisces are also relevant. He the place that he sold when Saturn went through Pisces, he bought when Jupiter went through Pisces. So he's like when Jupiter goes through Pisces, he kind of acquires property. When Saturn goes through, he like loses his place. Uranus goes through, it goes through like this, unprecedented situation with his residence, and then Neptune again, with moving to the White House. And so, unfortunately, that's the way it kind of looks from that perspective, that he loses his house. And so, so that either means he loses or he just serves out his term and someone else is at the top of the ticket. And the only person I can think of who would make the most sense for the Democrats to have at the top of the ticket would probably be the vice president as the highest ranking Democrat. and she's still in her
I
peak
don't,
period
I don't,
according to
I don't.
Zach release.
Yeah, you think she'll be? I don't think it'll be her. I really don't think it'll
Well,
be her.
think about this. Her ascendant is in the late 20s, I believe, of Gemini, which is very close to
Okay.
the sun position, and that's where Jupiter's going to be at the time of the 2024 election. Jupiter will be like on her ascendant,
Okay. Well,
conjunct Trump's sun.
admittedly, I haven't, looked at her.
We
I'm
have
being.
her time chart.
I mean, I do have her chart, but I mean, I haven't been like looking
Yeah,
at her chart and thinking about the transits in 2024.
it, it's
Um,
I mean, I think it would be amazing, but I also have been a little underwhelmed as by how she's kind of
I
done
mean,
as vice president.
her popularity is even lower than Joe's. She's got just like, no popularity.
It's
I
very
I have a
unfortunate.
hard. I mean, she would have to like, maybe she rescues like a baby from a fire, or, takes down a school shooter or something like that, and her, like she'd have to do something really
You know,
amazing
on the
for
other
them to
hand,
even look at her.
it's typically pretty hard for a vice president to do anything very substantial, because if they were to, then it potentially takes away from the president's thunder, and so I think it's a very difficult position to be in. I mean, unless you're like a Cheney, who's operating things from behind the scenes, I'm not sure that she has a lot to do, and thus she doesn't have a whole lot to stand out on, and thus even the things that she does are not that.
I don't
I
buy
mean,
that,
maybe
because
that's
even
charitable.
I don't buy that, because look, Obama was Obama, but Biden had a lot to do as a VP.
That's true.
Biden was
He
a
needed
visible,
him,
and
yeah.
involved VP.
Yeah.
And I don't think Biden's telling Kamala to like cool her heels and not.
Well, I
Not
guess what I'm saying is, I think what if Kamala had the actual opportunity laid in front of her, like, would she step up? Like, would she
I think
kind of go
she would
for it?
step up, but I don't see the Democratic Party going for her.
Yeah,
I'm interested. I find it interesting that Marianne Williamson has a Sun Uranus conjunction. So
that's right.
if she got the nomination, it would be two Sun Uranus conjunctions against each other in an election where Uranus is about to be a really big deal. So
Yeah,
that's
true. Yeah,
that's
no,
that
that would potentially support her or Elizabeth Warren as another
right,
Sun Uranus conjunction.
right, but Elizabeth Warren isn't running yet.
Yet.
Yeah,
I mean, she still could. She did last time, so who knows?
Yeah, so who knows? Who knows? But that was just an interesting thing. I mean,
yeah, she may do better than anyone expects.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's
I mean, Elizabeth Warren sounds really good right now. Actually,
I mean, as full disclosure, as a voter, that's who I would have preferred to have run in 2020. Yeah. It was kind of sad that she wasn't able to.
I mean, at one point, it really seemed like she was.
Well, remember, I originally lived in Massachusetts, so I also supported her for Senate as well. So, but I think, I don't know. What have you looked at? I guess I understand why you're more bullish on Trump, just because of the Sun Uranus stuff. But I was just curious if you had looked at any of the other challenge charts, like DeSantis or something like that.
Oh yeah, I've looked at DeSantis. Oh, I mean, I guess we're going for hour 3. Whoops, what's going on?
I think he's a Capricorn rising.
Or
I think he's. I mean, that's just. Pardon me. That's just based on my analysis of his Saturn return. It would make sense if it was a 9th house type thing. I think he like graduated from some college program at that time. I forget exactly what it was.
Didn't he go to Yale? He went to one of these. He went to school that.
Yeah,
like it's kind of like with W. Like, he went to what school? Like they gave a diploma to him.
Right.
But I want to say it's Yale.
No, I think he went to some Ivy League schools, but I can't remember exactly what it was. I'd need to look at it again. I'd want to double check that. But I remember just thinking like, oh, so if he was Capricorn rising, that means that Saturn would have been going through his first house, and there would have been the Saturn Pluto conjunction in his first house when he was coming on the scene during the pandemic as that crazy Florida governor who is letting all these people die.
Right. I just want to say one thing about the what we're talking about here.
Sure.
Where am I going with this? 440. Right. Okay. Red twos. Donald Trump and red twos. First of all, his older brother, born. Hold on a sec. Let me just get rid of this thing here. Go to just planets. Okay. So his older brother, Fred Trump, who was like, at first a hero to Donald and then died young. He was born 15 days before Venus retrograde. He's a red 2. Okay. So that's red 2, number 1. Jeff Sessions, who, started off in Trump's good book, but soon was not. He was his first attorney general. He's a red 2. Venus.
He made good cookies as a.
He looked like a Keebler elf. Yes. 16 days after the direct station of Venus, he's a red 2. Carly Fiorina, the only woman to run on the Republican, primary.
Yeah.
She's a red 2. Chris Christie, red 2. Okay, Steve Mnuchin, who actually,
treasurer. Right?
Yeah, the treasurer, and he's the only one here who Trump, I think, still likes. Rand Paul, another guy who ran for the Republican ticket, not a fan of Trump. Megyn Kelly speaks for itself. Red 2, Venus retrograde in Scorpio.
Oh yeah, big Venus retrograde energy.
Ted Cruz, he's a red 2. Venus just coming out of the retrograde, and Ron DeSantis is a red 2. Trump's really got it in for the red 2s.
Wow. Yeah, he's not gonna.
And when you look at
Meatball Run.
and when you look at I was just, like I said, I was watching the debates earlier.
Yeah.
The second debate had 11 candidates, right? The first debate, there was like the bottom 7 and then the top 10. And then the second was 11. Out of those 11 candidates on stage that night, 7 of them were born in a red interval. Okay, because Jeb Bush is red 1. Ben Carson and Scott Walker are red 5s. It was just red all over the place.
Yeah, wow.
And like I said, Chris Christie, Rand Paul, Carly Fiorina, all red 2s. Ted Cruz, red 2. So it was a heavy emphasis on the red. And those debates, the first 2 debates were during the red 5 interval.
Now that's weird though, because Trump is not a red.
No, he's not, but he's got an ascendant with Mars in Leo, and the Venus retrograde. Oh my God, I gotta show.
That Venus retrograde happened in Leo. Yeah.
But like, look at this. This is the transits he gets when he's that first debate. This is the debate starts, and one of the first questions is raise your hand if you won't support whichever candidate wins, no matter who it is. And Trump's like, yeah, no, and he's like, yeah, if it ain't me, I ain't supporting them. And he's the only one that does that. And everyone's just like, what the hell, man? And it's so funny to watch this stuff with hindsight. So these are his transits. It's a Venus retrograde with a Mercury and a Jupiter. His ascendant is as 29 here. I'll stick his ascendant in there.
Wow.
So yeah, he's not a red interval guy, but look at these transits. And this is the night he fights with Megyn Kelly. She asks him about women, and he's like, only Rosie O'Donnell, and she's like, no,
you got blood coming out of there, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All that stuff is here, and as I showed you, she's a red 2. And most, half the stage is a red 2 nearly, and most of the stage are red intervals.
So he stands up though for not being a red. Like,
he does.
I wonder if that's
he does. Out of all those people, okay, Marco Rubio was the only white interval.
Little Marco.
Little Marco. Trump was the only black interval. And then John Kasich and Mike Huckabee were blue intervals. And then everyone else is red.
Weird.
Yeah. So that's why this interval stuff is
important.
Really worth following. It's it tells you something. And You know, this we're about to have Venus is going to be retrograde on Trump's ascendant again.
Yeah. Well, and even with Mercury, I believe
Yeah,
now Jupiter will be in Taurus rather than the ascendant. And you know
Leo,
what?
Leo,
To
like
be
last time.
right.
Yeah,
To be, I mean, I think a big difference for him though is even if this is when he's maybe able to kind of endear himself to the Republicans again or something, or kind of work his same cinematic, he's going to face a lot more like scrutiny, right? I mean, because he had the benefit in the last election of just not being taken seriously. That worked for him. That
yeah.
they didn't feel like, okay,
I
well,
mean,
he's doing this crazy stuff on stage. He's not actually going to win, so who cares? Now it's going to be like, okay, you have like a whole track record now. Like you can't hide.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, look, I'm done. You know, I mean, it was like
and the
surely
other Republican, yeah,
I'm done saying like surely the Republicans wouldn't be that
yeah,
stupid. I'm
no,
done ever.
yeah, no,
I'll never utter that phrase. Like,
underestimate
you know,
the
I mean,
stupidity and ignorance
yeah,
of people again.
like it started with Reagan. It was like, I mean, like when Reagan was president, it's like, wow, he's like, this is a real, like, I can't believe they put this guy in office. He's, he's really ignorant. And, then the first Bush was president. He had Dan Quayle for a VP who was stupider than Reagan. And then, um, and then we got W, and then we got Sarah Palin, and it's just like it's like
Parade of ignorant,
yeah, reverse
ignorance.
It's a
Yeah.
devolution. So yeah, that's where we found it. So I'm done, trying to second guess how low the Republicans will go. But look, they're having he's ahead. He's
Yeah.
yeah, he's in good shape, unfortunately.
Now, have you happened to notice anything in the previous Venus retrogrades in Leo for him, like 1999?
His father
That was
died. His father died, and his divorce with Marla was finalized.
Didn't he also run for president for the 2000 election in late 1999?
Yeah, that was coming out of the red. Venus was out of Leo by then, but yeah, that was more like October, November of 99.
Would that still have been in the red
Yeah,
5?
the October. I think the start of it was in the red. Yeah.
So he did have a run for president in 1999 at the tail end of the red 5.
Yeah,
and
then the thing about the 99 retrograde is that it would also be a Taurus perfection year, just like 2015 was.
That
which
means
makes
Jupiter was in Taurus.
Right. It makes Venus the Lord of the year. When Taurus is the perfection. Yeah.
So this is closer than. So in a way, summer 2023 is actually quite similar in some ways to the 1999 Venus retrograde because of the not only is the same perfection cycle, but then also square Jupiter and Taurus.
Wait, but he's not. He was in Taurus in 2015, so he's going to be in. I think Capricorn this time.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, what I'm saying is
but the Jupiter
the
Jupiter is the same as 99. That is true.
24 years later. That's the Venus Jupiter cycle. So, I mean, what about the red 5 from 2007?
Wait a minute. Am I wrong about? Hold on, I might be. I think I've just screwed something up. Let me double check my. 2016, or his birthday in 2015. He's 69. So 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, it's in. Okay, so 99. He wouldn't have been in a Taurus perfection year. That's where I made the. I knew I was making mistakes.
No worries.
This is his solar return for 2015. He's starting a Taurus perfection year. You see, Venus is already in his first house, but yeah, it would go retrograde here.
I didn't see the chart.
Yeah.
If you thought you were sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did that again.
No worries.
Thank you. You got to remind me.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault.
I tried to gently remind you.
Yeah, gently. We're talking about Trump. You don't have to do it gently. So yeah. So when it's in 2015, he's in a Taurus perfection year, which means that for the 2007 Venus retrograde, he would be in a Virgo perfection. No, he would be in a Capricorn perfection year, and then in 99 he would have been in a Virgo perfection year. That's the thing about tracing the Venus synodic cycle with annual perfections is it'll stay in the same element.
Yeah.
It'll switch. It'll go between the 3 signs of the same element. So whenever he's in a red 5, a year where there's a red 5
Oh,
Venus interval, his
wait a
perfected
second,
sign
wait a
will be
second.
an Earth sign.
Okay, so in 1999 there was a red 5, and that red 5 Venus retrograde was also square Jupiter and Taurus, and I just remembered that in 1999 Saturn would have been with Jupiter as well at the end of
Yeah,
Taurus,
that's
which
right.
is
Yeah,
probably why, although he had the ambition to run, it wasn't successful
it
ultimately
wasn't
with
time yet.
Saturn in
Yeah.
around his midheaven. But this time there'll be a red 5 in Venus retrograde in Leo, square Jupiter and Taurus, but the only other planet there will be Uranus. Oh no.
Yeah.
Um, hmm.
Yep.
Out of 10 like that. But is that enough? Is that enough to say that?
Look, I mean, it's so funny when you watch these debates again, you see the commentary after. Like after the first and second debates in 2015, the press people are just like, well, he sure blew it. Obviously, let's talk about John Kasich, or let's talk about how Scott Walker's doing. It's really like everyone's making these
So
same
will it
presumptions.
just be the same thing that
I mean,
happens
obviously,
again?
I don't think it's going to be the same thing. I mean, we know what a Trump presidency is like, but somehow I think he's going to make it. Or if he doesn't, the other thing we're saying about the Confederacy is like, yeah, he becomes the Jeff Davis, because Jefferson Davis was a Gemini sun who had Uranus conjunct his sun when he was
Right.
When he became president of the Confederacy.
Right. Well, and that's the other big thing I'm sort of anticipating for Neptune in Aries, just as a side note, is the kind of the rise of this idea of sovereignty, right? Because Aries is like, I'm about me. So you had this this movement to sort of become independent from the United States, or this sort of sovereignty thing. And then of course that's really juxtaposed against Neptune in Libra, when you had the development of like the United Nations. You had this idea of like this principle of peace and cooperation being this kind of aspirational ideal. So
and trying to make the world sort of more balanced,
yes,
Yeah.
but then with Neptune and Aries, you're going to have this push and call for sovereignty again, and to say like, no, we want to be.
The world is deglobalizing,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and largely, because the U.S. is just not going to have its Navy patrolling the waters. So the whole this open season on global trade that we've had for the past half century or whatever.
Oh, and the submarine came about during the first Neptune Aries period, right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So there you
the
go.
ironclads and all that stuff. Yeah, a lot of stuff happened with naval stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, we went in a whole extra hour bonus Trump hour at the end of all that music stuff. Like,
oh my God.
That's the kind of Uranian anarchic lunacy that we sell here on our Sunday live stream. Isn't that right, Patrick?
All right. Well, I'm gonna take a look at Kamala Harris' chart.
Okay.
And try to console myself.
I know usually astrologers are all like, egotistical and argue with each other on social media. Like, no, I'm right. No, I'm right. But like, this is my turn to go like, I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
I hope you're right. Yeah.
This is what I think, but I hope you're right.
Or I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong. Yes.
Yeah.
And I could be. I am making some assumptions, but
regardless of the exact way that it turns out, I think you're absolutely right that it's. The Uranus and Gemini thing for the U.S. is just law, just practically.
Yeah. It's his country, and the rest of you just live in it.
Trump wouldn't even have to be in the picture in order for that to still be kind of
some people have said that, and I don't disagree that even if he's not the candidate, he's sort of the daddy.
The kindling, or the kind of
the spark. you know.
or something. Yeah,
He's the something. He's the yeah.
well, and that's kind of already happened. So, like with the the Mars Uranus conjunction that occurred at the January 6th thing. So it's kind of weird to think just how much bigger this could get. And I've kind of wondered, like, what if this Neptune Aries period is the inverse of the Civil War, where you have like the secession of the blue states, you know, or
Yeah,
like
look,
a kind of inverse of the Civil War.
I mean, the last time, I mean, it was the thing about secession was the real fear. I mean, of course, it was like the economic loss if the country broke apart and all that. But because Mexico was fighting off a French occupation, Cinco de Mayo, that happened in
Right.
1862 in the middle of all this stuff. And the worry was that if the Confederacy seceded, that they would expand southward, like conquer Mexico and further possibly, and create this big slavery economic empire. And that's what the Union was really worried about. Not just like, the Confederacy breaking off on its own would have they would have lost the cotton money or whatever, but the Union would have survived otherwise. But there was this real fear that the Confederacy would expand south and become this greater empire that would be a big threat to the Union. And that was like where the real impetus to fight secession would be. Now today, if there was a similar kind of secession right down the Mason-Dixie line or something, resembling it, that it's not the same. It's kind of the opposite. It's not a matter of the South expanding south. It's like, we'll make our wall twice as big or whatever.
Yeah, they don't want to. Yeah, they don't want to expand.
They don't want to expand south. So there isn't the same. There's not the same motivation to hold the thing together that there once was. So, there's that to consider.
Yeah.
It would definitely not be worth fighting a war over. Like, God, if you want to leave, just go.
Right. Well, I almost wonder if that'll be more like, I mean, maybe that would be a sort of more peaceful way to go about it. It would just be to say like, this is a divorce and we're dividing up the assets and,
Yeah, like those points in relationships where two people simultaneously recognize that it's just can't go further, that it's going to destroy them both, and they best just. I don't know.
Yeah,
I hope everyone stays healthy and happy.
Right. I mean, I think like you said though, it's these Uranus and Gemini periods tend to be when the United States it tries to avoid it at all costs, but eventually just cannot avoid the inevitable any longer.
This is true. People talk about the U.S. being this really sort of warlike country, but no country has tried harder not to fight wars like they did, like in the First World War, the Second World War. Like really, they did get dragged kicking and screaming into those things.
Yeah, stretched to the absolute limit. So I kind of wonder if that will be kind of the same thing this time around as well.
Who knows? Who knows? Right. Well, 3 hours. I got to let you go.
Okay.
I can hear screaming kids in the background. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry.
If you stuck with us for the full 3 hours, congratulations to you. Most of you did.
Wow.
I think at our peak viewership, we had maybe 10 more people, but most of you really did stick with us. All right, let's do our last minute shilling. If you want to book readings with Patrick or myself, we both have websites and the means for you to do that. My website is nickdaganbestastrologer.com.
And I'm Patrick Watson Astrology.com.
There you go. So we're both available. We both would love to talk to you about your own charts, about music, about whatever it is you deem our fee is worth. You're the boss. You
come to me if you want to talk about Beethoven.
I'm sorry I put you on the spot.
No,
spot with Beethoven. I was not expecting the answer.
Not a big deal.
Beethoven.
I can play some Beethoven. I can play a few Beethoven pieces, but
everyone can play Fur-Elise. I've been on the mountain here in Montreal. There's like a piano in the summer, an open piano, and it's like one person after another goes up to this free piano and they play Fur-Elise. It's like, oh, and there's the fourth version of Fur-Elise I've heard in 20 minutes.
All right, awesome.
Okay, do more lives. Yeah, Geocosmic Valentine. We are doing joint lives every Sunday afternoon. And I also do solo streams on Mondays and Fridays, which admittedly are not as much fun as when, I'm paired up with my good buddy Patrick. But it's a good time in its own way. And but yeah, thank you, Patrick.
Oh,
Have
you're very
yourself
welcome.
thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you next Sunday. If you like this, it'll just get better.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
See you guys.
And
Bye.
away we go. Ciao.